Okay, so I'm about to get ready and take y'all down a different rabbit hole now. So this guy here, this is me, when I probably was about 21, 22, this guy here was getting ready to retire, right? And we was all getting ready, to see him off fairly young. He used to tell me stories about his ancestors, okay? And one of the things he used to tell me was you couldn't find what past his granddad, not dad, but his granddad, okay? All right? So you couldn't find his bloodline, you couldn't trace his bloodline back past his granddad, okay? And what he said happened, the story that was passed down to him was they was all part of the Orphan Train, okay? Now, the story with the Orphan Train is hundreds of thousands of kids was being shipped from the east because they was overpopulating to the west, all right? Now, do these look like kids that have been kidnapped, or do they look pretty happy, okay? Okay, this the Orphan Train. Over 100,000 orphan and poor children from eastern cities was sent to the Midwest. Now, this is where it get kind of creepy and have a lot of questions. Who are these children? What happened to their parents? That was like the most creepiest question that we used to all sit down and talk about. And when you start digging a little deeper, these outfits don't look familiar. But once again, if you really want to do some research and depend how far down the rabbit hole you want to go, these are all the great fires that happened around the time those trains was pulling into those cities. Okay. And like I said, the orphan kids, that's a rabbit hole in itself. Okay. You have to remember, all these fires, go look at the pains. It's a railroad run directly in the town where the fire happened at. Now this is Texas. Look at the dates. This was going on during the Civil War. All this. So y'all had 120,000, and it depends on what you read. And like I said, depending on what you read, 200,000 you got this going on during slavery, the Civil War, and then going into the Great Depression. You want to go down the rabbit hole? Go look up the orphan children, the orphan trains, and how many of those kids. What happened to make y'all have to orphan 200,000 kids? And y'all dressed like a lot of people in the Great Fat photos. But this is a weird rabbit hole. Y'all jump in the comments and let me know.
So I'm going to show y'all a photo. I want you to look at this photo. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of photos of people during this time who are in full garb with umbrellas, top hats, covered from neck to toe, hats, umbrellas. I want you to really look at this. Okay? I want you to think about when people with albinism go outside, how they have to cover themselves completely. And I'm not saying this is albinism. Please don't add stuff where it's not being implied, but we're going to use that as an example, maybe. How they have to cover themselves completely or apply a lot of sunscreen. They have to protect themselves from the sun, okay? I want you to think really long and hard about it, okay? Think really long. Just look at the picture. Think about it. This is the beach, y'all. And then there's this. They didn't suddenly appear. This phenotype did not suddenly appear, but it gradually appeared between 8 to 12,000 years ago. I want you to think about that. Also, before that, there was the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, or the Younger Dryas event, which was the last ice age. There were the earth, parts of the earth, a lot of the earth was uninhabitable for hundreds, if not thousands of years, okay? And there are these massive underground cities that have been uncovered in Turkey and other places, okay? I want you to think really long and hard about this, okay? My mother, when she got married to my real dad, okay, they went to a mountainous area for their honeymoon, and they went toward an underground lake, okay? And the organisms in the lake had never seen the light of day, right? And they were colorless. I'm not the first one to think this, but it makes you wonder that before this period of time, right, when you look at the entirety of human history, even further back than recorded time, right, most of the people that roamed the earth were dark-skinned, swarthy-skinned. You follow me? And what happened to the branch of humanity that ended up splitting and becoming, getting the phenotypes of the lighter skin, lighter eyes, right? I want y'all to really think about this. Where, I can't say as a whole, I can't apply a blanket statement because there are some good ones, right? But, they have this hate for the other. They have this apathy. They have this need to conquer and this imperialism, colonization, violence. Wasn't there a time when a lot of these people in their civilizations, they didn't bathe and they would get sick and die because of it? Do y'all follow the line of I wonder, and of course, I'm not the first person to think this. This is like out there. I understand that. This is pure out there speculation. If you live underground for decades, a century, and you're not exposed to the sunlight, you're not going to be swarthy skinned. And then they had all these fairs across the world, right? And in America, these fairs where they showed these cities that looked like Greek and Roman architecture as far as the eyes can see, that were built in a year or two, and the buildings were disposable, temporary buildings, right? Yeah, okay. And they re-educated human beings, right, on how to raise kids, how to take care of babies, in the United States, the metric system, the branches, how the government ran, how money worked. You got a certificate at the end of this fair, and only the uppity people could afford to go. World fairs. And they did not make money. They lost money. And then you had the orphan trains, and you had the foundling hospitals, and you had the orphanages, and you had all these orphans, and you had these infantoriums, and you had these weird ass postcards with babies and cabbages and babies and growing from Gordons. Then you had the cabbage. That is a fucking rabbit hole. Okay, that is a fucking rabbit hole and a half, and it is out there. So if you go down that rabbit hole, be prepared. If you haven't yet. I'm just saying. Makes a whole lot of goddamn sense. I don't know, y'all. I don't know. I'm just saying.
I'm a conspiracy theorist, but you don't have to be one to find this weird. Do you know what Cabbage Patch dolls are? They were marketed as a fantasy, babies grown in a field complete with their own birth certificate, like you were adopting your own child. But what if these dolls were based on a real event that we didn't learn about in history class? In the 1800s and the early 1900s, we saw hundreds of thousands of orphan children being sent out on trains and even shipped through the mail. Where did all of these children come from? Were they the children of parents who were thrown into insane asylums because there was a surge of these as well during that same time frame? Or is it something deeper that's been quietly buried over time? I know this sounds crazy, but when you start looking at the artwork from this era, the symbolism, even mention of children in fields, something feels off. Here's where it gets really weird. There's a passage in the book of Jasher that describes children sprouting forth from the earth like grass. Coincidence? Maybe. It talks about the ancient Israelites when they were in Egypt, and it says they left their children upon the field and returned home. Elohim ordered his earth to receive them, which the earth opened up its mouth and vomited them forth, and they sprouted forth from the city like the herb of the earth and the grass of the forest. The ancient Egyptians tried plowing the field, but they were unable to hurt the infants. It does make you wonder why certain ideas show up through time and then get reshaped into something harmless like a children's toy. Of course, we are told the absolute truth about our history. I'm sure there is nothing significant that has ever been simplified, reframed, or forgotten, or turned into a children's toy. But I don't know. Let me know what you think.
My grandma used to lecture me for hours. And I used to hate that shit. But she used to call me to the kitchen. She used to sit in the kitchen in the house coat, sitting on a bar stool, drinking coffee, smoking Benson Hedges and menthols, back to back to back to back to back, and would sit there and talk to me for hours. And it didn't took me until I was old to realize she was dropping gems. One of those gems she dropped was Cabbage Patch Babies. The whole time I'm thinking she was talking about Cabbage Patch Kids, the little dolls that came out in the 70s and was real popular in the 80s. That's what I was thinking she was talking about back then. But she was talking about something more diabolical than a motherfucking doll. My grandma was born in 1934 in Lower Georgia. And her mother, she was the only child, but her mother was, which is my great-grandmother, was a maid for the affluent white folks. This was back in the 40s. So my grandma used to say, my mama used to nurse children that did not belong to the family she worked for, or did not belong to the mother. Kids was popping up in the 1940s and 50s in white suburban homes where the mother was infertile, and they was calling them Cabbage Patch Babies. They were clones.
Infant incubators with living infants. So do they have like exhibits of non-living infants? It just is odd that that's such a catchline in so many of his adverts here. And again, look just how they were dressed and stuff, just like carnival barkers, not actual like doctors, nurses. Baby incubator exhibit, an exhibit of intense heart interest, the most highly educational feature on the pay streak. Leading children's physicians, highly trained nurses, every modern surgical appliance and medical appliance constantly at hand. Hygienic day nursery for children, rest and assurance for tired mothers. Oh, and by the way, the baby incubators in the very hygienic day area by the nurses and the fake doctor, they're going to be charged 25 cents a head to be gawked at. That sounds like a very hygienic and sterile area. And I mean, you can see this is up till the 1940s. Just look at how they're dressed. This is Coney Island. Baby incubators with living babies. Once seen, never forgotten. I mean, that's just such a weird statement right there. Once seen, never forgotten. What was so special about seeing a premature baby all the way up until the 1940s? Well, if you had a major reset, if you had such a loss of population and children were a hot commodity. Like, for whatever reason, there was very little amount of children, but at the same time, they had the most amount of child labor at this period. If you remember, we did that on kind of one of my first episodes. In the mid-1800s, we had like 2 million children in the labor force, and they were doing dangerous labor like mines and coal mines, textile mills. It's very, very odd, but at the same time, babies and children are such a like rarity that you can have carnival exhibits on them. Again, at the same time, they're having these people exhibits. Here's some of the nurses and everything just standing out at the interior, showing the incubator babies and nurses. All of this just seems very dark, soulless to me. Very, very dark and soulless. The Buffalo Orphan Asylum. Never before in our 82 years of work have we so much needed your help. The war makes the children. That's just a little excerpt from the Orphan Asylum in Buffalo. There's another one. You can see the Mason symbol being flashed by this gentleman. So he had a team of highly skilled physicians and nurses, but he himself was a fake doctor. Make that make sense. This is one room in the infant incubators building in the incubator ward where infants are first placed when sent here. They are taken at the proper time. Look, they even have like little guardrails for the lines here. Taken from this ward to the nursery. There are 11 incubators in the ward, and 2 or even 3 infants may be placed in each incubator if desired. So they have 11 incubators in this ward, but they had such an amount of premature babies that they could pile them up 3 at a time in these incubators. Very, very dark and odd.
Have you guys ever looked into the official story of the Cabbage Patch Kids? The official story goes that these children were actually born of cabbages. They were grown, adopted, and sent all over across the world. But now there's a guy coming forward and claiming that this is not just a story. He is claiming that children were actually lab grown, dispersed throughout Europe and beyond, and that he himself is a clone, and that 80% of the population are clones themselves. But y'all, we already knew this, but it feels good to have them saying it themselves. Listen to this.
So from the theory of there's so many clones coming into Europe, right? That would mean there's even potentially clones in this room right now. There must be so many.
80% of the Caucasian population.
80, okay, cool. 80% of the Caucasian population are clones. So, it's not about racism.
No, it's nothing to do with race.
Is there any science? Is there any science that you could have a clone in your life, that you're in love with a clone? Like, I know a lot of people say that they don't think, they don't have internal dialogue. Is there anything you've come across?
That's exactly what I was about to say. So Dolores Cannon did the work on this. So Benjamin Franklin also wrote about this, saying that there was a dire need to fill America with Caucasian people. So for whatever reason, they decided to do that. They say that there is no inner dialogue, and they called it whitewashing. But Dolores Cannon believed that 80% of the population that look like me can't trace their family tree back past really the 1800s with any accuracy, and we refer to them today as NPCs.
Wow.
She said they were soulless. I don't think anything living is soulless. I think we all have a connection. But it was called whitewashing, for want of a better expression. And it was to make out, and they did this at the World's Fairs and Expositions. They would have on display people from indigenous tribes, and they would bring children from Africa, put them on display, and they were labelled as primitive and savage.
Wow.
And this was specifically to dumb down and remove history. And this is connected to the Moors from Africa, who built some of the most beautiful architecture in the world. They wanted everyone to consider them as primitive. And Tartaria was removed for a similar reason, so we would consider Moscow, Russia, to be behind, a little bit backward, and that was another part of it. So, that's what happened. And what I'd suggest people do is watch the second film that Alice Guy produced, which is on YouTube. It's called Midwife to the Upper Classes, and you'll see an example there of where the middle class couple come to buy a baby.
They told us the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair was just a 6-month party with ice cream cones and Ferris wheels. But what if those massive palaces weren't built for the fair at all? Picture this. Over 1,500 breathtaking buildings covering 1,200 acres. Domes, columns, and architecture so advanced it looked like it belonged to an empire, not something slapped together in a couple years out of plaster and straw. Official story? Temporary exhibits for the Louisiana Purchase celebration. They tore almost all of it down right after. But look closer. Those structures were gigantic, flawless, with technology and beauty that rivaled ancient wonders. Why build something so perfect just to destroy it? Whispers in hidden history circles say these weren't new builds. They were leftover ruins of Tartaria that lost advanced civilization wiped from the maps. The fair was the perfect cover showcase, the old world's glory to the public. Then, destroy the evidence and rewrite the timeline. Why hide it? Because if people knew what humanity was truly capable of before the reset, everything changes. What do you think they don't want us to remember?
Yo family, let's revisit the World Fair of CHILAGO, or what they renamed to as Chicago. Now, these photos are allegedly for educational entertainment purposes only, taken somewhere between the time of May 31st through August 30th of 1893. Now, in 2025, you don't see any buildings that are being built like this. Nothing close to it. Look how beautiful CHILAGO was. Now, they're saying that they took this photo 22 months before they quote unquote built that city, which we know they didn't build the city. This was after they destroyed the so-called World Fair, which we know was ancient civilization, in divine honors to the Atlanteans. Some call it Tartaria, mostly because Tartaria was the last civilization that knew how to operate those free energy buildings. And they made sure that they destroyed it. So what you're seeing here is the destruction and a photo shoot of them eventually making it seem like they were building stuff. So wherever they destroyed it, they started to put up cranes and scaffolding to make it appear that they built it within 2 years and destroy it within a matter of days. Now, if you still believe that, then I don't know what to tell you. So in 11 months, they want you to believe that they built all of this. But in modern day, with this so-called advanced technology that they claim to have, they can't even fix a damn pothole in the road that's been there for 6 months. They ain't got enough money for it, right? And then they want you to believe that all these statues, this beautiful artwork, was made out of cheap materials. Nah. This was an ancient civilization that had free energy buildings and didn't charge people to live on Earth. They want to hide this from you for educational entertainment purposes only. Come on, family. When are y'all gonna wake up? Divine honors to all the ancestors. Peace and love.
Here's this weird scheme, and I'll show it to you guys here. So there was the Great Fire of New York in 1835. And then there's the Great Fire of Chicago in 1871. And then there's the Great Fire of Seattle in 1889. And then there's the Great Fire of Atlanta, 1917. And then there's the Great Fire of Baltimore, the Great Fire of Michigan, the Great Fire of Boston, the Great Fire of Spokane, the Great Fire of Pittsburgh, the Great Fire of Los Angeles, the Great Fire of Jacksonville. There's literally great fires going on infinitively. If the government had a bunch of manuscripts, artifacts, historical documents, things that they didn't want to proceed in the future, all they have to do is burn it. Oh, the library got burned. Oh, the museum got burned. Oh, this got burned. Oh, it's all gone, guys, And then within 100 years, which it clearly has been longer than that, nobody will be able to prove, nobody's going to be alive as a first eyewitness testimony of anything. So you can say whatever you want, but nobody's going to believe it. They're going to say, yeah, no, there's no evidence of that.
They're called Gen Z because they're the last generation before they reset the simulation. There was X, there was Y, which is me, millennials, us, and then there was Z. There's Gen Alpha. Do you ever think who came up with these terms?
Just looking at the world right now, you can actually see how they restart the world and reshape history. Just look at the bombing of historical structures. 4 or 5 generations from now, they will never know it was there. They will only hear stories about it. And we all know when a story gets into too many people's hands, that motherfucker get to changing up like a motherfucker. Just look at it. Hawaii, the wildfires, the wars, all the new construction, the earthquakes, the landslides. Should I continue? If you take a look back into history, it's always been a cataclysmic event going on. Mud floods, earthquakes, wildfires. Take a look back into history and just see how many massive fires that went on in big cities that engulfed a lot of historical landmarks. Stay woke.
How many times do you think they've actually reset society? That question sounds crazy until you start seeing the pattern they keep trying to hide. Klaus Schwab was already talking about a great reset right before 2020. Then suddenly the whole world gets shoved into a new normal. And if you zoom out a little, you start noticing something uncomfortable. This isn't the first time a reset has been pushed. Look at history. We lost Egypt's advanced knowledge. We lost the Library of Alexandria. We lost whole civilizations like Tartaria, just wiped from the record like they never existed. Every time humanity gets close to waking up, close to remembering what we once knew, something happens, and the slate gets wiped clean. No memories, no context, no explanation. That's why people call us a species with amnesia. We're here, but we have no idea how we got here or what came before us, because someone keeps hitting the reset button. And here's the strange part. 2020 wasn't just a reset attempt, it was also a wake-up call. If life hadn't been disrupted, a lot of people who were completely asleep would have stayed asleep forever. Humans run on routine. As long as the routine feels safe, we don't question anything. But when they try to force massive change, they risk waking people up, which is exactly what happened. And now they're trying to shove everyone back into a comfortable fog, redefining normal, flipping reality upside down, making you beg for stability, and using that desperation to settle you back into silence. So, here's the real question for you. If this pattern keeps repeating, if history keeps getting erased, rewritten, and replaced, how many resets do you think we've actually lived through? And how many more do you think they're planning?
This is just a theory.
Photos that I'm about to share, and they no longer have to be buried deep in the archives. And for the beginning of these photos, I want to focus on the main theme. The theme being that the building is completed, and they are simply putting scaffolding around the buildings. In my opinion, they are painting these buildings white so that they look brand new, when in reality, they are old and from the past civilization. Here we are told is the government building in the Philippine Exposition. We can zoom in on these guys, and of course they're not doing anything productive. You would think that they could build a better ladder compared to what they supposedly built right next to them. And again, let's switch over to this one, where we are told that this is a construction photo when it's clearly completed. The only construction going on here is the scaffolding, again and again. People just standing there looking so odd, and it almost looks like they just have a kid here. I mean, look at the detail on top of the columns. It's unbelievable, and I believe that I was correct when I said that they were just painting these buildings. They are not constructing anything. Now let's look down here at the bottom right hand side of this photo. It says right here that these are painters and decorators. They are not building anything like the description says for these photos. And they needed a place to live on site because they were painting all of these old world buildings. They were going to be there for a while. The buildings lasted forever. The paint did not. So they needed to get a fresh coat of paint on there. But when you look at the description of the photo, it says that it's a photo during its construction. So they are clearly lying. Painting is not constructing. It's painting. Two different, completely separate jobs. So these are all from the St. Louis World's Fair that we showed in the intro. The dates are from 1803, not 1903. And it had a mud flood that ripped through the interior of these buildings. So let's take a look at this building from St. Louis. And this is founded and renamed the Varied Industries Building. This is another completion photo that they're trying to say is a construction photo. And I want to zoom in on the top of this building. Can you believe the tech that is on the top of this thing? It's incredible. We have shown the airships in episode 48 and how they connected these flying crafts to the top of these buildings and use them as charging docks. And to be clear, I don't think that the past civilization was limited to just these airships that we have photos of. I think that they had much more powerful vehicles. But let's get back to these photos. Skeptics have said these buildings were just made of wood and very easily constructed, and then that's why they knocked them down. No. The only wood that was being used in this project is for the scaffolding, to paint the old world buildings white. The lumber is for the scaffolding, not the actual building. Let's make that very clear. If you've ever gone to one of these buildings, the pillars are pure marble. They're not wood. You can use the Field Museum as an example, located in Chicago. And now here we have another incredible construction photo, where for some reason, there isn't much construction going on, just a building with more scaffolding. So my question is, how have they gotten away with this nonsense for so long? That is not construction. I can clearly see that the building is done. Just because someone put a ladder in front of it doesn't mean this is being constructed. This is the process that painters use. Any painter will confirm this. And also imagine carrying these materials up that scaffolding. If this was really a construction photo, it would be impossible and very embarrassing because nobody would be able to do it. Does anyone see a crane anywhere? No. Once you know, you know. You don't go back to believing in the lies because they are ridiculous. We have more tech in the background here. There are 2 of them actually. And here we have a bunch of people that found this building. Let's take a second and look at the size of this thing. This was the Palace of Electricity. Could you imagine this being constructed today? This thing is unbelievable. And remember, there were so many of these buildings being thrown together in like 2 years supposedly at the same exact time. Oh, and they are all dated 1803, not 1903. And what happened to the Palace of Electricity? We were told that these buildings were practically worthless, and they ended up in dump sites because they were just made of wood, right? The problem with that is that they are contradicting themselves. The Missouri History Museum states that the construction for the Palace of Electricity and Machinery costed them $412,000, which is the equivalent to $11.48 million today in 2023. So it's practically worthless, or is it 11.4 million? This is the kind of stuff that makes me fully trust the mainstream narrative. I love just knowing deep down that they would never lie to us. It's just really nice to know. I love that they provide us with full logistical details. They never contradict themselves. They go that extra mile to make sure that what we are being told is exactly what happened. Oh, they don't do any of that? No, they don't do any of that. Literally none of it. The title states that this is the Iowa State Pavilion construction. And if you just shut your eyes right now, you can clearly see them right there laying the cornerstone. Okay, you can open your eyes now. This is the master builder down here. And those guys up there were also fully trained on how to build massive palaces. In fact, they are admittedly self-trained, getting a lot of their architecture designs and ideas from working on Abe Lincoln's house. As you can see, they were very busy workers. They got that building done in less than 2 years, ready for the world to see. Temporarily, of course, before knocking it down, so that nobody would ever see it again. And we can't forget to mention that they have painters actually painting this building. 4 of them to be exact. Proving again that these are not construction photos. They are painting photos. And over on the right-hand side of this photo, we can clearly see a construction process happening, putting the scaffolding together with perfection. Just look at that scaffolding architecture. Okay, I'll be done with the sarcasm for today. The mainstream narrative is so ridiculous. It's really hard to not make fun of it at this point. And then we have more painters. He's got his paintbrush in his hand and the paint right there on the scaffolding. So it's pretty clear at this point that these are no longer allowed to be considered construction photos for anyone that ever had a doubt in their mind. Now he's holding up a hat, and that hat says something on it. I wish I knew what it said. Comment below what you think that hat says. All answers are accepted. The guy next to him is also wearing a top hat, which is, of course, if you're going for the productive painter / I still want my style points look, very common for the 1900s. Very impressive. And here we have the United States Fisheries Building during its completion. But I'm going to zoom in on this building on the right-hand side because it's very strange. And we have these creatures' faces on the side of this building, with writing here as well. I can't see exactly what it says, but it definitely doesn't say Fisheries Building. And then we can see more painters up here on the left-hand side. And here we have a modern fisheries building. Built by us, of course, which won't last forever, unfortunately, because that's the way we construct things. So here we have a fisheries building that is designed by the Greek gods. And we are told that this is a separation of 100 years. But we are evolving and advancing, when in all honesty, that's the complete opposite. More and more people are realizing that the mainstream history that is written down by some random individual that was never even there and is being told what to write is a joke. Anyone that is seriously backing the regurgitated nonsense at this point and is serious about it should be very careful what they hope and believe in, because I have a lot more on the way that is going to rip their history books apart. History that we have been force-fed since day one and rip it right in half. So here we go. The photo description states that in the summer of 1903, construction continues inside the entrance to the Palace of Machinery for the Louisiana Purchase Exposition, the 1904 World's Fair. The date of this photo is in 1903. The fair in St. Louis was in 1904. So this would all make perfect sense, except there's a massive flaw. A flaw so big that it's undeniable proof that this building was constructed 100 years before the 1903 date that we are told, and proof that there was a mud flood that ripped through this building at some point after 1803. Where is the foundation of this building? Incredibly detailed construction projects do not take place on top of dirt and garbage. This, in my opinion, is the most incredible photo that I have ever seen to this point. A lie right in our faces, saying that this was being built in 1903, when we have multiple dates of 1803, time-stamped right on the building. Multiple times. Not only that, but you can see that the mud flood damaged the bottom of this building here. The mud came after the construction, not before. And I want to make that point very clear. This is a cleanup project, 100%. After this World's Fair, they knocked these buildings down. Not because they were pathetic, but because they held dates that do not fit in our mainstream timeline and architecture that we cannot reproduce today. It's incredible. I've been talking to many people, engineers, construction workers, architects, and more about this photo. They are telling me that this is undeniable proof, and at this point, there isn't an excuse in the book that could save the mainstream history. It's time for everyone to wake up to the nonsense that we have all been force-fed to believe. Oh, and we're just getting started today. Welcome to episode 49 of my lunch break. I hope you're all having a great day, and if you're new,
Wow, man. Damn.
different negatives. I would say this is quite advanced for such an early time period. There are also several photos that had unknown artists, and they'll show some of these when typing in old Photoshop, but just kind of strange that nobody knows who took these photos. The double-headed man from 1865. A man juggling his own head from 1880. A man on a rooftop with 11 men in formation on his shoulders. And this one really makes you think. It's kind of funny because I remembered when I was a kid, my mom put up this photograph in our bathroom. It's a really famous photograph, Lunch Atop a Skyscraper, 1932. But now that we've learned more about early photographic techniques, who is to say that this has not been altered? Yet, nowhere do they say whether or not they used multiple negatives in this photograph. Well, it's mostly attributed to Lewis Hine, but the identity of the photographer remains unknown. This is literally referenced as being a piece of American history, but they don't know who the photographer is? Notice the faint glow or halo around the people. Is this a photo montage? Think about it, they started figuring out that they could produce legendary, amazing photographs and then claim that they're real. Think of the implications. You don't think robber barons, wealthy capitalists, and these elite politicians were aware of this? I think they were well aware of it, so much so that it was an entire industry. Now before we continue, let's have an understanding of the different types of photo processing, which each one is unique and yields different results. Photography is simply a chemical technology. You have a plate that can be a variety of different materials. Older ones were metal or tin, and then came the glass. These plates are coated with chemicals that then react with light. Using different chemicals and different plate materials would produce a variety of different effects. Here are some photographic processes that have been essentially forgotten. The heliograph, the holotype, calitype, phys-autotype, colotype, cyanotype, daguerreotype, ferrotype, ambrotype, carbon print, albumin print, and carta de vista, but there are many more and others that were kept secret as they had this technology to assist engravings with copper plates. Now most of you know about tintypes because they have these at the fair. They're thought of as being much quicker than the other types, and so not much is needed to be done in the studio, but many of these were actually altered to create composite photographs. Tintypes and ambrotypes used this early wet collodion process in order to capture an underexposed image that they would then treat with chemicals to be treated as a positive instead. So this negative, treated as a positive, would be put in front of black paper to create ambrotypes. And then for tintypes and ferrotypes, it would be a black lacquered metal. So they don't say this is a manipulated image, but the sky is very clear, and in this tintype, it's from circa 1900. They also had what was called a photographic fixer, in which they used potassium cyanide to obtain as light-toned an image as possible. This was a way to fix overexposed images as well to make them more stable and prevent fogging. Tintypes were actually first called melanotypes. Crayon and chalk portraits were artistically manipulated images that appear to be a cross between chalk or crayon drawings. Japanese photographs in the 1860s all went through a tinting process. Many of these are extreme quality, but what it shows is how much processing went into making a photograph, even to the point of them being a staged artwork. The process of doctoring photographs has existed since the dawn of photography. Yet, are we not going to discuss the ethics involved with such a powerful tool of propaganda? Remember, these early photos are historic records in many instances. We do know that they had retouching studios that would go through the process of de-aging, similar to modern day social media filters. They could do this before the 1900s, and they could clean or remove anything that they wanted. I think that's the base concept for Vanilla Skies, that these photos show signs of early tampering. And it doesn't really matter that there were some photographic processes that overexposed the whites, because as we learned, they had other processes to accommodate for this. Hence, they knew this was a problem and that it could be used to hide certain features. I'll explain more on that soon. But early photographs, about all of them, would go through a photo touch-up process. There's old books that explain this clearly. Listen to this. From the 1905 Illinois College of Photography, we have a small book speaking and explaining photography and how it depends on retouching. Quote, photography, what it is, and how it is done. For the benefit of those who are not familiar with the art and science of photography, some explanation is necessary. When a picture is taken with a camera, it is made upon a glass plate, which after development shows the object in shades of black and white inversely. This plate is called a negative, in which all little imperfections of the skin, together with the shadows, wrinkles, and facial blemishes, are necessarily exaggerated and must be overcome by handwork in order to produce a correct and pleasing picture. It is to improve the picture by removing and softening these blemishes that the plate is sent to the retoucher, who works upon the negative itself with fine implements." End quote. So, they had this art mastered. Entire colleges dedicated to this profession. Let me show you some examples of what they could do. Well, I think most of you have heard about the de-aging, but they had a process that was called etching, that an artistic photographer could come in and manipulate the negative. It's interesting because you can't find detailed explanations online on what this is. We know that they would retouch photographs with paints and even airbrushing, which is a term they still use today, but they were doing this since the beginning of photography. Airbrush can actually be more difficult to notice, but they don't really talk about this early photographic process too much. It's called etching and modeling, and in a book from 1909, which is actually based on an older book from 1868, we are given many examples and explanations as to what this process entails. Quote, etching is exactly the reverse of retouching, for by means of the etching knife, which is a very sharp steel blade, the film is shaved or scraped in proportion to the amount required to be removed. Thus highlights are reduced, shadows accentuated, objectionable portions removed, and detail produced where the opacity of the negative was so strong as to destroy it. Now, that's still not really explaining it, so they were scraping the negative with a knife to remove things? Okay. And they were messing with the lights and shadows, and to remove or soften over detailed areas. Yeah, but not only could they remove blemishes and make people look younger, they were capable of warping and manipulating necks to be skinnier. So this is etching? Here is an illustration in which they detail this etching process where they straighten crossed eyes, which is pretty impressive for this time period. So they could take a picture of you with your eyes closed and then somehow etch an eye in, which looks to have started from a drawing, and then they mixed in other negatives, then finally cleaning it up with the etching process to make it look real. If you were only looking at the final version, you would never know that this photo had been manipulated. So they could also change people's size. And then they could add clothes onto a subject that would end with a realistic result. They could fix hairstyles, change your body into drastic proportions. Then they explain how to etch single figures to remove figures from groups, okay? This is 10 years before Stalin, and it's based on an older book. So they could have been doing this stuff far earlier. Okay, listen carefully to this. Quote, by the combination of etching and retouching, by the use of the knife and pencil, you etch and model. And with these two instruments, you can make any alteration you desire on the negative. Highlights on the bones and cheek may be cut down and subdued, thick necks made thin, excessive drapery removed, crooked noses straightened, shadows accentuated, hair added, backgrounds altered, objectionable portions removed, figures taken from groups, etc. So basically anything they wanted to do. This is old world Photoshop. They did this with landscape paintings.
Many depictions of American cities with extremely beautiful and picturesque architecture. Some would call the architecture Old World, reminiscent of the classic buildings that are found throughout Europe. Indeed, we have a cornucopia of architects imported to America from a wide variety of European countries at this time. These men envisioned an America with a flair for their specific European heritage, and thus we are told that the major cities began to rise like hotcakes all around the country. As we dive into the photography from the 19th century and into the turn of the century into the early 1900s, we have a few things that become abundantly clear. Today, I'd like to tie together the often misconstrued atmosphere of the mid-1800s in America, supplying you with ample information taken directly from the currently accepted resources to provide you with a definitive look at one of the strangest and seldom discussed events of the mid-1800s. That is, the Orphan Trains. Many photographs of America from the 19th century show a landscape that is already shaped, cities that are formed, we're told, by the ingenuity of early European settlers. What we see in the photographs many times, however, is empty cities. We also see cities that are built with architecture that appears to exceed the means of the people that are constructing the cities. In short periods of time, usually less than 100 years, a city in America will go from what we're told was indigenous earthworks and mounds into a well thought out masonry and brick masterpiece. What's not often cited in these sources is, many times, the Native American earthworks were actually incorporated into the cities, into the bases of the structures, into the parks, and into the way that the streets were formed. Furthermore, many indigenous groups built using bricks and stone, making it easier for the European settlers to dismantle their work, reuse the bricks and stone, or even claim the indigenous structures as their own. As we dive into the empty cities further, we must also remember that slave labor was often used for the construction of these major cities. This is key as we begin to break down what really happened in America in the mid-1800s. Now, as many of these cities in the photographs appear empty or barren, or the streets often mud-covered, and while the masonry buildings appear much older than they should be for the photographs, we must begin to question the harsh conditions of the mid-1800s. Could weather events really have caused these buildings to appear so aged? It brings me back to the European architects said to have constructed these massive feats of engineering. Did they really build these structures and then basically leave them be? Meaning the cities that they were built in were then in charge of the upkeep, and essentially, most of these cities appeared to just let the buildings weather over time. That's what we see in the photographs from the mid to late 1800s, before times appear to change by the early 1900s, when the same architecture, the same structures, and the streets around them appear much more serviceable. Again, the question becomes, where are the people? And the answer may be more shocking than you expect. The architecture aside, we're told that a disproportionate amount of people were locked away in mental asylums in the mid-1800s in America. Another key component to understanding America in the 1800s is to understand just how many asylums were being built. Not just a small building, a little retreat, or a doctor's office, but we're discussing over 500 massive castle-like structures, usually built in a Kirkbride plan in large forested areas away from the public. These buildings employ the finest of European architectural designs, and most of these asylums, almshouses, and sanitation centers were later converted into prisons or torn down entirely. But why were all of these asylums being built, especially in the Northeast? When we look at photographs of the large empty cities, sometimes we see a disproportionate number of children in the streets. Often, we're told that the photographs would be taken first thing in the morning when the streets were nearly empty, yet we often see these large packs of children seemingly roaming the streets unattended. How does this tie into the overarching narrative? Well, by the 1840s, large portions of the northern states had freed their enslaved people. This is a claim that we often see cited in many history books. What we don't see mentioned in the history books is, many times, the freed people were almost instantaneously locked away in asylums and sanitation centers. Hence, why we have so many of the large asylums being created in the early to mid 1800s. Think of the saying, seeking asylum. It wasn't just African Americans who faced these hardships. We also have countless indigenous people facing the same fate, as well as anyone really perceived by the larger society to be different. We're told, according to the official 1840 census, which was the first to report individuals as, quote, insane, that large numbers of newly freed individuals in northern states, in some reports, upwards of 40%, were locked away in asylums and considered to be insane. This becomes even more alarming when the results are compared with the census numbers for enslaved individuals in the South, where the number of individuals marked as, quote, insane was nowhere near as high. Politics aside, we can see how even when the freedmen were freed, they never really achieved their freedom from the tyrants and often faced even more hardships. The tragedy becomes the children of these individuals. And this is where our story really begins to come full circle. Before 1853, there was essentially no place for the children of the insane to be housed. Many times, according to this narrative, these children would have to commit crimes just to get locked up and be taken off of the streets. Any family deemed unsuitable, we're told, could be subject to the cruelty of America and could be labeled unfit and committed to an asylum. What America didn't have in place from the earliest days of the 1800s until 1853 was a place for these newly orphaned children to go. We're told these children would often create tribes or gangs, usually an intermingling of all races and religions, who would walk the streets looking for food and handouts. Have you ever seen the film Gangs of New York? This is the way that these children orphan gangs are often depicted. New York is also key in this narrative. I'm going to try to keep this as brief as possible, but here are some facts to know before we dive in. Freemasonry is banned by the Catholic Church. Freemasonry arises from Rosicrucianism, which essentially postulates that the world is built on a secret esoteric order, which can be determined in part using factors such as geometry and gematria, which are also used in most Masonic constructions. New York, once home to a vast array of indigenous tribes and indigenous cities, with the Palisades even being discussed as a possible site for the ancient hidden city of Norumbega, by the early 1800s, New York was becoming abundantly more Catholic. A neighborhood of freed men, mostly African American, lived in New York City in what is today Central Park. Their rich and vastly built out neighborhood was called Seneca Village. Now, we've already discussed the large numbers of freed people that were being committed in the mid-1800s. We can see, in New York especially, that this is a practice done quite often and without warrant. While the vast landscapes of Seneca Village often operated outside the scope of most European New Yorkers' lives, the freedom of Seneca Village was first encroached upon when in 1837, construction began on the Croton Distributing Reservoir, also known as the Murray Hill Reservoir. This is an absolutely epic structure. The entire Croton Aqueduct of New York is absolutely breathtaking, and some of the images really left me without words. To imagine the scope of engineering and manpower that this would have required is without question. The reservoir covered over 4 acres and held over 20 million gallons of water, supplying the entire city of New York with drinking.
Hey everyone. Today we're going to be discussing a lost history. A very strange world where babies were literally sold as commodities and shipped as mail. Insane, right? What does it say about our past when, just 100 years ago, people were essentially shopping for infants? And why isn't this widely known? Could it be that this piece of history was deliberately buried or omitted due to its unsettling implications? I mean, did people actually need to mass purchase babies? Was this part of some grand repopulation scheme? Or a migration wave where orphans and young kids were sold and moved westward? We've touched on this topic before. About a year ago, we released a video called Repopulation Postcards and the Cabbage Patch Kids. Our understanding has since evolved, and we got our hands on a brand new collection of absolutely jaw-dropping postcards that we can't wait to share with you. If you missed that earlier video, here's a quick rundown. While researching for our Old World Photoshop episode, we stumbled upon a peculiar trend in postcards from the early 1900s. These postcards, dated from 1890 to 1920, are a genre unto themselves and were circulated throughout Europe and the United States. But here's where it gets wild. Not only do these cards feature babies sprouting from cabbages, there are other categories that make it abundantly clear what's going on. It would seem that babies were being sold in baby farms or even baby shops. We're about to unravel a historical enigma that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the past. Now that previous video did very well and went viral, but there were some things that we glossed over or didn't fully unpack. This video aims to set the record straight. This topic isn't just about whimsical images of babies and cabbages. Some viewers actually thought we were saying babies were literally grown in cabbages, and a few content creators even accused us of photoshopping the cards to deceive people. The disbelief mainly comes from the fact that many have never encountered these postcards before, but they are very real. And what they suggest isn't just shocking, it could completely upend our understanding of history. Before we dive into our updated collection, let's break this down a bit more because there's a lot to digest. Repopulation? Babies for sale? What are we even talking about? Yes, not only have we expanded our collection of these postcards, but we've also translated them. And now we've gained a clearer understanding of what these cards depict and the messages that they carry. It appears that these postcards were essentially advertisements, a way for people to literally select the baby they wanted to purchase shown on the cards. If you're a regular on our channel, you're probably already familiar with the Cabbage Babies category. We covered this extensively in our first repopulation postcards video, but that's just scratching the surface. There's another category that might be even more unsettling. We're calling it the avant-deux postcards. Avant-deux means for sale in French. While a significant chunk of these postcards are in French, this phenomenon wasn't limited to France. We can say this with certainty because our collection includes American cards with US postage stamps, as well as German and Dutch cards. So let's be clear, these postcards depict babies as products, essentially turning them into commodities available for purchase. And that's not just creepy, it's a stark reminder of how different social norms and practices were just a century ago. Alright, well let's start off with a postcard that blatantly shows two babies next to a sign saying avant-deux or for sale. The caption of the top reads, "Jean who laughs, Jean who cries." At first glance you might think it's just some quirky vintage humor, but my suspicion? We're looking at something far more insidious. These are actually advertisements. Still skeptical? Check out this next one. Modern Baby Bazaar. Free entrance. Trustworthy establishment. Does not fear competition. Everything is for sale. All you have to do is take. We don't accept returns. Do you find anything cute about that? The card is literally branding itself as a trustworthy establishment and emphasizes a no return policy. Is this trying to point towards something much deeper? Also note the Rex label at the bottom right corner. This indicates one of the studios involved in creating these postcards. They weren't the only ones, but it seems they had a role in distributing these cards. There could be a connection to Rex theaters and cinema, although that's not confirmed. Let's examine another card. This one also boldly states, Bebés a vendo, and here, the babies are displayed in baskets, as if they were produce in a grocery store. But it doesn't stop there. A baby is shown growing out of a cabbage, tying this back to the larger theme of repopulation. It's clear that we're not talking about cabbages here. This is about the commodification of human life. Here's another one featuring cabbages being sold. To the left, we see babies sprouting from both cabbages and roses, freshly harvested if you will. On the right, there's a display of babies, each accompanied by a phrase. The card's title, Babies for Sale. With them, you will have the greatest of joys. The text on the left of the card states, Your choice, all our babies bring happiness. Then under each baby, there are phrases almost like mini resumes. For example, I will be good. I will not pee in the bed. I am cheerful. I would love you. I will wait for you. I would be nice. It's almost as if each baby is accompanied by a sales pitch, a list of features to help you make your purchase. So we're forced to ask, what's going on here? It's not just an odd historical artifact. These postcards serve as a window into an unsettling era, one that treated the youngest members of society as mere products, complete with selling points and no return policies. Yes, these are babies being sold in a cart. The cabbages are symbolic of them being grown and sold as produce. This card proclaims, The cries of Paris. Here are pretty cabbage heads, babies, not expensive. Are we to understand that these children were being sold at bargain prices? And let's not ignore the emotional aspect. Many of these children depicted don't look happy. Some even appear to be screaming or visibly terrified. There are also cards showing babies confined in cages, treated like pets or even animals. Where's the humor in that? The card is explicit. Babies for sale. Do you want a baby? The implications are staggering. This isn't just an odd or quirky element of historical ephemera. These postcards are evocative of a time when societal values and norms were disturbingly different from today, to the point where the commodification of children was openly depicted and possibly socially acceptable. So the question is, what does this all mean for our understanding of history and human morality? Because clearly, these aren't just pieces of vintage art. They're windows into a world we can barely comprehend. This next card might just be the most unsettling one. The text is simple but chilling. For sale. Buy me. I'm bored here. And the background is just as disturbing. An empty street devoid of any life or activity. The child is bored, but that boredom seems to hint at something far more unsettling. What are we to make of this? An empty street, a bored child for sale? Could this be suggestive of a larger, darker issue at play? Maybe these children weren't just bored, maybe they were neglected, or worse, trapped in a system that viewed them as goods rather than as human beings. Moving on, here's another depiction of a baby store. Let's break down the text. Child market, beautiful opportunities, choose the cutest, large selection of babies. So a large selection of babies. Once again, note the text at the bottom. A vendu. These babies are for sale. This isn't just some quirky oddball postcard. Now this one's super interesting. This postcard belongs to the multi-babies, water babies category within our collection. This card is unique, however, because of the writing on the back. It's dated to 1907 from the postmark and was actually sent in the US. The message says, Dear L, don't you think they are very pretty on the other side? If so, hurry up and order one before they get sold. Love from Agi. So hold up. It's not just a surreal artwork. This person is saying to the receiving end that they need to hurry up and put in an order before they get sold? That's beyond weird, and it seems to suggest that this is more than just
important narratives to this point, to our research, in my opinion. We have the Pontifical College, Josephinum, where Joseph comes over to the USA from Germany in 1867. 3 years later, he becomes a priest and has his own church within a few months. And he gets to buy the house next door, of course, to support 12 orphans. And do we all know about the orphans at this point? Possibly a repopulation tactic that was going on in the 1800s. It's very interesting. Was it only 12 orphans? Or was this one of the places that they would send the orphans through to get them into society? Because who would ever question Joseph the priest from the 1800s? You know, the guy that just randomly shows up from Germany, has all the money ready to buy houses somehow, to support orphans. It all checks out, of course. Simple stuff for Joseph. This was known as the St. Joseph Orphan Asylum. It grew so rapidly, for some weird and of course very random reason, that 5 years after it began, Joseph moved the operation closer to the railroad, which is how these individuals would be dispersed throughout the country. So this is a paragraph of admission. We are being told, down to the smallest detail, how this operation worked. It would go through churches. They would bring a manager type over from Europe, call them a priest, give them a house, give them the resources to run these operations, purchasing new buildings with ease to run the program. So not only do you have the world's fairs that were a repopulation tactic, you had these orphan trains and orphan hubs where they would be dropped off and planted into society. The new facility that Joseph was just finding and saying was his. I want to make that clear, he wasn't building anything. He was given these buildings that were already there from the previous civilization. So the new building gave the orphans a training in the trades. So this Joseph guy was obviously sent with a purpose, to repopulate and teach to a brand new society, one that didn't have any skills. This right here is how you reset a society's technology level. The teacher is never in charge of what the students learn. This Joseph character is a teacher of a class. He is not the principal of the school. There are many schools. He is clearly taking direction as to what the students of the new society will learn. There were many classes like this one all over the country, happening simultaneously. This was an operation. This went on for 12 years with zero backstory. Finds the Collegium Josephinum, this massive college, is just found and ready to roll. No clue where the money came from. No mention of how many men were needed to build this place. Just found it. And its first class of 23 men began. It's unbelievable. This is one of the most important stories to our research, in my opinion, because it shows exactly how the operation took place. It's actually laying it all out there and shows us exactly how they repopulated these regions in the USA. It shows us the operation with the orphans, the teaching programs. And this was our base for our technological knowledge. Whoever controlled this operation from the top has all of the technology from the previous civilization and is controlling what technology we get to have. And they've clearly been doing this for a very long time. And for anyone that's on the fence, we have the St. Vincent's Infant Asylum, located in Baltimore, where we have tunnels under the ground. This infant asylum was in use in the mid-1800s, during the same time period as German transferred Joseph. And what do you know? In the early 1900s, the operation was done, and they declined new orphans. 1941, they changed this to apartments. And in 2015, they light it up and try to destroy it with a fire, but they fail. So 3 years later, what do you think happens? 2018, the building was illegally demolished without a permit. You literally can't make this stuff up. It gets more and more obvious. If you're still on the fence, let's go even deeper. We have the St. Mary's Orphan Asylum, located in Galveston, Texas, where they tell us that this one is haunted. Now, I've talked about hauntings before briefly. I'm not going to say that there aren't any hauntings, but when it comes to these old world buildings, I think it was a tactic to keep people away from them. Just say that they're haunted, and it scares everyone away from investigating. So we have yet again another orphan operation going on in the mid-1800s. And I'm just going to let you know that this is going on and on and on. There were so many orphan operations going on in the mid-1800s because this was how they were repopulating these cities. So where were all these kids' parents? Is this where a lot of our families originated from? Is this why the family trees in the USA almost all end around the same time period? We are told hundreds of fire stories through the first 52 episodes. We know that that is the key, and the nod, that it's a building that was constructed by the previous civilization. The St. Mary's Orphan Asylum. For anyone wondering where the parents of these orphans were, you might want to check the other asylum, the insane asylum, because they were not going along with the reset. Here's a graph showing that the insane asylums are disappearing over time, and I wonder why. Good thing they cared so much about us in 1955 and 1965, because surely that was the fix. Oh, it wasn't? And then a fire had devastated the St. Mary's Orphan Asylum in 1875. If anyone is still on the fence, there is room over here to get off the fence. And honestly, who would want to sit on top of a fence anyway? So we have Ohio, Baltimore, Texas. We have all these towns and cities being repopulated. Brand new people, brand new social structures, brand new mindsets, and resetting what people are taught. This all happened around 150 years ago. So this is all very new. This isn't thousands of years ago. Then we have another very interesting aspect of this in Germany during this same exact time period. And remember, we also have good old Joseph from earlier, also from Germany. So here we are given the Kinder Beware install. And if I pronounce that wrong, I hope you all understand. This is where we are given kindergarten, another tactic to teach children the brand new social structures. What better way to trick people? Take them out of their family's home and tell them what to think, and then test them on it. Failing the test will then lower your self-esteem, putting a social pressure on children to agree with this new way of taught, or they will be called dumb and get an F. This is an operation. It's all connected, and it's designed to enslave the world's population. Year after year, we are all taught a false narrative. We've all been brainwashed into thinking that you are either smart or dumb based on a curriculum that holds zero value in the real world. Now, who knows if this Frederick Froebel was even a real character, but they do admit that kindergarten starts in Germany around the exact same time period that we're talking about, the mid-1800s. So I wanted to tie it all in with the rest of the world. This is a worldwide operation. This is not just the USA. We have a lot of things in the USA being controlled through Germany during this time period, especially the education aspect of it. And I want to point out that yes, we have borders and division now. We have so many countries in the world, and everyone is separated. And you're unable to travel to other lands unless you have a piece of paper that is registered and checked at the checkpoints. But who's to say that there even was a border in the previous civilization? Were there so-called elected leaders controlling everyone, deciding what we can and cannot do? Could they have had a truly free life where they were able to travel wherever they want freely and not feel like they're invading someone else's territory? I would say, in my opinion, this was the world that was here before the reset. And something happened where this past civilization was wiped out and their technology was stolen by a group, and some of it. Today, we visit the Basilica of St. Anne in Detroit. And let's have some fun today. The mainstream narrative had the hardest time explaining this building. It is much older than we are told. And I want to make that clear right from the start. On the actual website for the Basilica, they couldn't just say that it was simply constructed 300 years ago, because that wouldn't make any sense in the United States timeline. So, here we go, and I quote, "On July 24th, 1701, 25 canoes glided to a stop at the foot of a high bluff." Before I continue, I want to make this clear. 1701 may have been the original construction date of this building, and it may have been older than that. And this is not including updates to the building and additions. And they needed to explain it away with a canoe gliding nonsense story. And I say this because if we go down in the story a little, it says that they had to build a chapel. We couldn't even get a paragraph into this, and we get the nod. Do we all see it now? Is this a coincidence anymore? Or did we find the key? I believe that we have cracked their code to understanding their symbolism of these buildings. Here we go, and I quote, "The earliest records were destroyed in a fire, but a new registry has been maintained since 1704. So we definitely have something incredible going on here in this narrative. Let's go to the second paragraph where they tell us that this is the 8th structure on this site. They tell us that the oldest stained glass in Detroit is found in the current basilica. Well, of course it is. This thing is hundreds of years old. And would you be shocked if I said thousands? At this point, these narratives are extremely sketchy. We have a fire story all over the world. Not every house on the block goes up in flames, but every single one of these old world buildings pretty much do. You have to ask, is that mathematically possible? No, it isn't. The fire is the symbolism, the hidden key to the past civilization. Now here, as I visit this building, it was under construction. If you saw episode 33, you will understand why I don't think that these buildings need to be fully restored, and that they may be removing something from the building. I have shown comparisons between the old world and the new world construction on the same building many times before. Our restoration completely ruins the building nearly every time. It doesn't help it. So here they have given us a 5-phase construction process that's going on right now. I tried to go inside the basilica and the man would not let me in, which I thought was very interesting. Now, right outside, I couldn't believe my eyes. I looked down and our ridiculous construction is crumbling away, of course, and exposing the ancient hidden brick roads. And what is this? Do we have a play on words? Of course we do. An admission that this building is older than 300 years old. When they tell us that it has gone through many changes in its 300 plus years. 300 plus years? Yeah, plus 1,000 years. There hasn't been any changes to this building. We currently do not construct things that last forever. If we made a change to this basilica, that changed part would have fallen apart by now. When we read the narrative, look very closely which words are being used. For whatever reason, they cannot lie to us. They have to tell us in one way or another. And right here, they do exactly that. The Basilica of St. Anda, Detroit, was founded in 1701. It was founded. I'm going to get very technical right now and prove that there is most likely more building underground. And this entire basilica and every other one that is said to be founded may have been underground. The legal definition for the word founded is based upon, arising from, growing out of, or resting upon. Now, it does not say constructed. It does not say built. This is a legal term. The word arise, meaning emerge. The term growing out of or resting upon. These are all legal examples of the word founded. So in legal terms, this building was doing either one of the three in 1701. Emerging from the dirt, growing out of the dirt, or just resting there. Legally, this building was not built or constructed in 1701. It was founded. Our houses are not founded. Our houses were constructed. I will be referring back to this episode in the future when we find another founded building. The fire swept through the settlement. And not only did it supposedly wipe out the church, but also several other buildings. How many buildings did they build in 2 years from 1701 to 1703? What is going on here? Just showing up here in a canoe. And 2 years later, they just constructed an entire town? I mean, that isn't even close to logical thinking. If this was true, then we have devolved horribly. I would love to just show up in a canoe to an empty piece of land with no known construction training, with a party of 50 people, 50 soldiers and 2 priests, and construct the whole town in 2 years. Where the heck did this material come from? You can't tell me they got the stone there by train. The first train in Michigan didn't come around for another 132 years. The first one in Detroit was in 1838, so 137 years in this location. Did they canoe the stone there from a mysterious land? How fast were these canoes? Basically, they had to knock out a whole town in 2 years. They needed a lot of material. And how many of these 50 soldiers were master builders with years of construction training? I'm guessing 0, because I don't believe that any of this story is true at all. It is a bunch of nonsense that doesn't make a single logical point. And they give us a fire story. Just look at the front of this basilica. This was constructed in a single year. Yeah, right. Let's go even deeper. Apparently, this church has a sister church, Our Lady of the Assumption in Windsor, Canada, which is about 5,000 feet away. And just as we talked about, how the one in Detroit is the oldest one in Michigan, here we have the oldest continuous parish in all of Canada, located 5,000 feet away from each other. In my opinion, these were built together, and for a very important meaning. And according to the narrative, this one needed to be built and rebuilt 4 times before they figured it out. So they tell us, for this one, they got some land in 1782. 3 to 4 years later, in the 1700s, this thing is done. 3 years to construct something that lasts forever in the 1700s? This is insane. So a totally separate group sets up a camp right around the corner. And what do you know? They are also master builders as well in the 1700s. Give me a break. My crew and I, we went and walked around Detroit even more to see what else was going on. We have the Cathedral of the Most Blessed Sacrament, which is now closed. Now, right in the middle of Detroit's NBA stadium, NFL stadium, and MLB stadium, and more impressive than all three combined, we have this, the St. John's Episcopal Church. And in 1859, it was just too small, of course. So they had to quickly construct this one in 2 years. Simple. Now, remember, Detroit, Michigan is freezing in the winters. They were not able to build anything in the winter months. So knocking this thing out in 2 years is ridiculous. Also, the first one took how long to build? Oh, 1 year? 1858 to 1859? Yeah, why not? Amazing. Clearly, this was here before. And this was the cover-up story. Now, all over Detroit, we have buildings. They have cinder blocks covering the original windows. In my opinion, this is because they most likely had stained glass windows that our civilization has no idea how to fix or maintain. They got rid of them and just put cinder blocks there instead. These windows were perfectly aligned and would have looked incredible. Take a look at this building. Go ahead and share your ideas on this one in the comments below. We have a building underneath this brick. It is clearly hiding something. The original windows barely align with the new brick. So strange. And what is underneath could be even more mind-blowing. Hidden by this brick. I had a lot of fun in Detroit and still can't believe they covered up the brick road with our current road. Totally reinforcing what we were talking about here. Attempting to hide the past civilization, but unable to keep it down fully. The past civilization simply built with perfection and will last forever, waiting for us to discover it. And now that we have open eyes, we can see the hidden brick of the past. And we now understand that there is much, much more below our feet that we just can't see. 1870, with no issues, of course. All of the horses pulled the stone to the site perfectly, and they all did their part. And the very next year, it of course burns down. In the Great Chicago Bomb. Oh, did I say bomb? Well, they tell us that it was a fire, but I don't believe that these great fires were actually fires. This looks to me like these so-called great fires in every single city in the world, basically. You can go ahead and look it up. It happened in a city near you. These were actually bombs, in my opinion. The destruction was something that a fire alone could never accomplish, especially when we are given the fire story from the National Geographic Society that the Chicago fire bomb started by accidentally knocking over a lantern when running away from a card game. And this causes the entire city to burn down? Stone buildings that look like palaces. I think we all know that this is ridiculous at this point. Could you imagine if someone in your neighborhood's house started on fire and that fire burns down your entire neighborhood? No. And not to mention that all of the houses would have been built with brick and stone, materials that don't burn down to the ground from house fires. Let's take a look at the destruction again, where they tell us that this is the ruins of the first Palmer house. And for one, are we 100% sure that this photo is showing us the destruction of the first Palmer house? And for two, is this even Chicago? Could this be a random street in Germany right after they bombed it? And for three, take a look at those buildings in the background. This is from a tipped over lantern? Or is it more possible that we are being lied to? The buildings are just ripped apart. They're shredded and smashed. And we know you can't burn down stone and brick buildings from a simple house fire. They don't get anywhere near hot enough. This is exactly why you put stone around the fire pit. You make stone and brick fireplaces inside your house, right inside your living room, and nobody panics. It doesn't spread into your kitchen or into your neighbor's house. It doesn't crumble and look like it exploded. Are you seeing the lie very clearly now? Now let's go deeper. Now they tell us that this photo is the second Palmer house that was constructed on the same site as the first one. And before we go on, they tell us that this was completed just 4 years after the Chicago firebomb by Donkeys Incorporated with the help from their horse and wagon community. They just cleaned up that old one that was exploded all over the place. They moved all the broken stone and cleared off a solid, nice, and level spot for a brand new foundation. In just 4 years, no problem. They built this after the fire. Take a look at these horses and wagons, right next to the completed palace. Built in less than 4 years? And honestly, it looks like it's been there for a long time. We had these wood planks set up that they would use to go from the paved sidewalk from the old world to these dirt roads. If this horse and wagon community built these sidewalks, they would have just built a ramp leading to the dirt with the same sidewalk material. But they didn't. They went and got a wood plank because that was what they were capable of in that time period. They were capable of a wood plank as their ramp to walk from the sidewalk to the dirt road. They found these buildings and they were occupying the old world civilization's work. And we're still doing this today, all over the world. In 1870, the first Palmer House was completed. In 1871, a year later, a tipped over lantern and tons of bombs go off and destroy the whole city. Now the whole city was destroyed. And I'm only bringing this up because it's to show what our civilization today is capable of so that we can compare. We had to clean up Ground Zero in New York, but it took our civilization within the last 25 years, 8 months to clean up 2 buildings. So in 1871, how long do you think it would take those horse and wagons? Realistically, without massive equipment, how long would it take them to clean this up? Not 8 months, I can guarantee you that. It would have taken them years. So now knowing this information, here we go. We are told that they cleaned up this entire site. They planned out a new one with perfection. They made sure they had the right construction team picked out. They planned out the materials. They had enough horses and wagons to pull the stone and marble. Everything else they needed to do, permits and everything. And get this second building done in 1875. Completed in 1875. From the point of the fire to the completion date, only taking 4 years. With Chicago winters being brutal, we know that this is logistically impossible. And they give us this nice photo of it. When today, we don't build any 7-story palaces in less than 4 years. And that's not including the entire...
In the previous film of our documentary series, we talked about the fact that there was only one world power in the world. The Russia Horde Empire. This was in the 13th-16th centuries of the Common Era. There was no ancient Italian Rome or ancient Greece, so vividly described in history books, supposedly before the beginning of the Common Era. Before the beginning of the Common Era, there was no China with its supposedly millennia-old antiquity, nor India or the Sumerian kingdom. There was no ancient Egypt or the states of Maya and Aztecs. All of these supposedly very ancient civilizations did exist, but only emerged in the Middle Ages, starting from the 13th-14th centuries. And the rulers of all European lands were not independent, because they were only sovereigns vicegerents of the Russian Tsar Emperor. At the turn of the 16th-17th centuries, a rift in political power in Moscow and a change in the ruling dynasty took place in Russia. These events, which later became known as the Time of Troubles, were one of the main reasons for separatism in Western Europe. Today, this period of history is known as the Reformation. In textbooks, it is only described as a religious split, schism. But the main aspect is omitted in the description of the Reformation. It was during this time that European rulers, that is, the horde governors, found themselves without a master, without an emperor. Therefore, in the late 16th and early 17th centuries, the rapid separation of the western provinces from the empire and the formation of new independent European states began, which required a new history.
There's a lot of people have asked about the incubators. The incubators were first introduced at the World's Fair, and some people speculate that it was a way for people to take children and put them into situations like this. like public schools and so forth, that they needed more bodies for this system. They needed more children for the system to repair, like what you see here, mud flooded cities. They needed more bodies to dig, more bodies to work, and to train them for situations like that. They needed them to be indoctrinated. So there you go. That's the theory with the incubators. Is the incubators were a cover story to move children around, not unlike what may or may not be happening today in other situations, but that would be a different video, obviously. So, like I said, I don't know everything about every picture, nor does a lot of other YouTubers out there who just put pictures out there and people can make what they want from them. We don't have answers for everything. All I know is that the incubators were a strange period during the World's Fair's history, and they say it was to show off the science and the medical breakthroughs. I don't know. This photo most likely isn't that suspicious or, important. It might even just be a Halloween picture. Now, the thing with the Coney Island and the other beaches of the early 1900s is they seem out of place. They seem like they've never even seen water. Why are they wearing so many clothes? Why are they wearing so many clothes in this picture? It's not just about modesty, it's about these are the clothes that they were given. They don't seem right, as other people have mentioned, as John Levi's mentioned, as Wood Nichols has mentioned. They don't seem, all these people seem out of place. Their clothes don't match what it just seems awkward. It seems overdone, especially with the hats and the umbrellas, parasols, whatever you call them. There's just a strangeness about all these people. They just seem out of place. This woman seems out of place on the diving board. It's like she's never been on a diving board before. And nobody can explain why people were wearing so many damn clothes. And why everybody had the same hat. And there's just a lot of inconsistencies. And when I first started doing these videos, I wanted to just see if people could kind of figure it out just by looking at them. But if people prefer narration, I'll give narration. I should give narration anyways. It's more interesting, I suppose. And if you don't want to hear my narration, then you can mute the video. And I'm going to be doing non-narrated videos, just the music, on a different channel. I'm going to make a separate channel just for that. And then this channel will be more narration videos. But I'll have a separate channel just for the music and the pictures. Anyways, like I was saying, with the hats, look at the hats. Now this picture I know is a lot to do with perspective, that those people aren't actually that much smaller than that foot, just kind of optics, but interesting nonetheless. Now this picture, I have no idea. It looks like Russia, but that's a pretty big bell. I don't know. If anybody knows, leave it in the comments. I just think it's interesting. I'm trying to give context now, but I don't have all the answers. All I know is all those guys got the same damn hat, and that's weird. They'll say, oh, well, there's only so many people making hats back then, and there's only so many styles of this. It's weird. It's strange. It's like they got a kit. It's like when they got here, they were just given a kit of clothes. They didn't always fit, and it didn't always make sense. And this year, I don't know, not sure. Maybe a World's Fair, maybe something else, not sure. It's not a picture, it's a drawing. These guys, captions of industry, I don't know. Pretty suspicious looking to me, especially the guy there on the staircase. It's his deal. Yeah. Like I said, if anybody knows more than me, feel free to leave it in the comments. Yeah, those are telegraph wires, but still, it's a lot of them. there's some inconsistencies with the technology and the infrastructure. We had telegraph wires, but we had mud roads. We had telegraph wires, but we had horse poop. Yeah. Dung. We had dung. We had dung in the streets. It just doesn't add up. We could build marvelous buildings, but we had horse dung in the street. We're led to believe that these inconsistencies are normal. They're not normal. They're glaring, stark inconsistencies. Yeah, some people were poor and they had to live in houses like in the previous picture, and they had to have jobs like these kids. But that's another inconsistency. If anybody wants to debate this, I'm open for discussion about anything I said. I'm trying to figure it out too. I don't have all the answers. And it looks like they're building the subway, or are they digging out the old buildings? That's the question. Look at all these people. They'll tell you that they came from Europe. They'll tell you that they came from Eastern Europe. They'll tell you that they came from Russia. I don't know. Maybe. But why? Why did when they get here, there was already a place, there was already skyscrapers? Did they help dig out what was still left under mud? I mean, no one can argue that the period between 1812 and 1920 was a very interesting period in America. Now, other people, they focus on Europe, they focus on Asia. I'm primarily concerned with what's happening here in the United States between, I don't know, I'd say 1812 and 1920. There's an incubator baby. A lot of talk about the incubator babies, the World's Fair, and the true meaning. I don't know, but it seems sinister. Here's a panorama of San Francisco World's Fair. There's a lot of people there. A lot of people came to San Francisco shortly after the earthquake. They thought it was a good idea to rebuild in an earthquake-prone part of the world. Look how fancy the trains were. Look how nice the rugs were. Look how nice the ceiling of the train car is. Why can't we do that anymore? Is it because it's not necessary? Here, look, see Chinatown, San Francisco. Same phenomenon. Everybody dressed the same. Everybody primarily has the same type of hat. There's another picture of a beach scene. Everybody looks like they're not dressed for the beach. And like I said, they'll talk about modesty, but it doesn't add up. People were allowed to dress appropriate for the beach. Here's some more immigrant children and their mother. I know that history was spotty then, but look at this here. The White House. And there's trash everywhere. These people look indigent and dirty, and they don't belong. I know things were different back then, but still, it begs the question, what the hell was going on back then? These people standing out here at the ocean dressed like that. Why? Why would you dress like that? Why would you dress like that if you know you're going to stand in the ocean? It could be a small thing, it might not be a big detail. Here we go, again, with the hats. Everybody's got the same hat. Or has just that cheap. They were just giving them away. I mean, like I said, I know it's a silly thing to obsess about, but, there's something to it. These children out on the street, probably gonna get taken to some.
Things were supposedly built in the 1800s. People didn't know how to do anything for hundreds and thousands of years until our amazing society showed up. Is that true? Or are we getting an ego boost to distract us from the truth? History tells us that we are the greatest. And we are, right? Well, that building is amazing, but we're still the best. Okay, that building is even better. What is that? Wait, they had wireless energy? What is going on? Fine, I'll admit it. The mainstream narrative is lying. What a great way to get people to believe the narrative. Tell them that they're the best. Who is going to question that? I guess some like us will, but the majority won't, for now. We look around and most of these incredible ancient buildings were taken over by banks or the USA. The USA and banks were both created, and what do you know? Right after that, we get all these brand new inventions. If we had these buildings in the 1800s, there's no doubt they had technology that is also hidden from our history. Other types of technology other than just building. If this timeline is planned, then all previous history is false or extremely altered. If this is true, and this isn't the first time the car and the light bulb were invented, where are we? And when was the first time it actually was invented? How long ago? What are the odds that the stock market is created 16 years after the USA is formed? What are the odds that the USA is formed in 1776 and 16 years later the stock market comes to be in 1792? How does that happen? And why do both of these things get all the great buildings? Have you seen photos of this building? If you've watched any of my previous videos, you will know that this building was found, claimed, and repurposed. Absolutely incredible architecture. 12 years after the stock market's formed, we have the first train. What are the odds? So these people needed to get around, right? So in 1804, we have the first train. In 1817, the first bicycle was created. So a servant to the Duke of Germany made the bike. A servant. This reminds me of the stories where the prisoners built all the Capitol buildings. What a joke. Nothing happened for hundreds and thousands of years, but in the matter of like 20 years, we got the USA, we got the stock market, the first train, and now we got a bike. And this is just crazy. Of course, we have to wait a long time now, till 1863 for anything else to happen. What torture. 1863, soccer was created. They had no games before this. Nobody played any games. No fun, no getting around, nothing. For thousands of years. No fun. Finally, we have some fun in 1863, and we have the first phone in 1876. So you can see we're getting some fun, we're getting some toys, we're doing some technology, we're introducing it to the community once again, in my opinion. That same year, 1876, we got another game created, the Major League Baseball. So now we have two games. Now things are getting fun. So the mainstream narrative can't figure it out. They don't know where baseball came from. They say maybe from a game called tut-ball, stool ball, Flanders, rounders. They just don't know. Then in 2005, someone wrote a book called Baseball Before We Knew It. And they don't know what the heck is going on. Honestly, it's embarrassing for them when you really read what they're saying and have open eyes. People are starting to use trains and bikes and phones and sports, all in the matter of a few years. Go figure. Nothing happens for thousands of years, but as soon as the USA opens up, everything starts happening. What are the odds? It's starting to rain here, if you can hear it. I'm sorry. In 1878, the first light bulb. So now we've got electricity. 2 years after the phone, we are pumping this stuff out. Guys, I mean, we got the phone, we got the light bulb. People are just brilliant in this time period, huh? Creating games. Should we mention the electricity story where Thomas Edison flew a kite with a key attached so he could electrocute himself? I bet you they wish they wrote a better story for that one. Oh wait, what? Only 8 years later we got the first car? This is no way. If you believe this narrative, if you believe that everything just happens at the same time and nothing happened ever before this, then I'm sorry. This is not possible. 1895, we got the first power tool, okay? No more chisels, we have tools. Just incredible what's happened in the last few years. What were people doing in the 1400s? They must have been bored with no lights, no cars, no nothing. What were they doing in 2,000 years ago? I have no idea. I mean, oh my gosh, they must have been hiding in a cave. if you believe the mainstream narrative. Well, 8 years after the first power tool, we definitely need to start flying a plane, right? So in 1903, we got the first plane. Let's just start flying these things around. The Wright brothers were so smart. Their mom must have been so proud. The first airplane flew 852 feet on its fourth and final flight, supposedly. But get this, it was damaged while landing. And minutes later, a powerful gust of wind blew it over and wrecked it. Couldn't write that any better. It had to get blown over by wind. And then, in 1920, the NFL was created. So we've got tons of games, tons of tech. We are just going. Our society is the best ever. I mean, you'd think that all of this would be created over a long period of time. It just comes right out, right after the next one, right after the next one, right after the next one, because 7 years later, in 1927, we get the first TV. People are making cars, planes, trains, TVs, power tools, electricity. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. But of course, the USA, the government, and the stock market were first. They were before all of this. Right before all of it. Not way before all of it, just right before. Right before. In 1936, we have the first computer. So now we have TVs, computers. What's next? 1946, the NBA started. So basketball starts with the most ridiculous story of all time. They started the game of basketball with a peach basket and a soccer ball. You know, all of us, we all just make games on our free time with peach baskets that turn into multi-billion-dollar industries. And in 1983, the internet was created. Just incredible. This timeline is so short, yet you've got everything you need, and you had nothing before this. How do you go from nothing to everything? It doesn't make sense. If you believe that, like I said earlier, there's nothing I can do. There's nothing I can say. If you really believe that we've gotten everything all in a matter of 200 years, then there's nothing I can say. This is proof, in my opinion, that they had all this stuff. They know how to run a society from scratch. They implant it right into our society after a few years. And here we are today. If this timeline was in court, the judge would laugh and tell them that this narrative is absolutely ridiculous. Talking about Caucasia, really quick, I want to just throw this in here. That there is another country that is clearly blurred out. I wonder if we weren't supposed to see that one. So we were given a photo with the airships in the background in the sky. So I went digging and found this photo from 1905, World's Fair in Oregon, showing more airships. And since I haven't really covered this topic yet on this channel, in my opinion, and a few others, this form of travel was all over the place. It wasn't just created in the 1800s, and the Hindenburg event was used as a scare tactic to make these airships look faulty, removing this free energy form of transportation technology out of our lives. Do you really think that they put a gas in these airships that would be so incredibly flammable and fly them over massive cities? Or does it make more sense that this Hindenburg event was a planned event to get rid of this free form of travel and wipe it from the history books? Here we have a photo of one of these airships sitting in between the two spires of the old world building. You can see that they use these spires to electrically charge these airships, and this was common knowledge. And in the very next photo, it's leaving the port. We are not given the truth about our history. This isn't something that we are ever told about in our mainstream schooling system all over the world. Do you find that odd? Let's keep digging. We see that the US Army had this technology in the 1800s, as well as the Navy. Now, this is a photo from July of 1931, and we clearly have an airship charging at the top of this building. So we have a lot going on here, and this was within the last 100 years. An airship charging at the top of this tower. Did you think they only charged at the top of buildings? Of course not. They had charging docks in the middle of the water. Here we have a photo of the US Navy airship in 1924, charging from this boat. Now let's zoom in on this charging station to get a good look at what's going on here. Now this is a technology that we were never told about. This is hidden from our timeline, a clear proof that there is much more to the story than what we've been told, especially since this was not thousands of years ago, and shows how easily history can be rewritten. This technology should be common knowledge at this point. Here we have another angle in Rhode Island. of the charging taking place. These airships were not powered by gas or simply helium. And if we switch angles here, we can actually see the charging tool that was used right at the top of this tower. They're clearly about to connect to the airship. So this, in my opinion, is clearly explaining what's going on at the top of these old world buildings. They were charging stations for the airships. They have the same features, and I guarantee you that they still turn on, since this was not that long ago. And I'm going to take this time right now to answer a lot of people's question. Will we ever find the truth? As we keep uncovering more and more documented evidence, we're going to find that the previous civilization was not that far in the past, and our current structures hold so much more technology than we ever truly understood. So in my opinion, yes, we are going to find the truth about all of this. We are uncovering the truth faster and faster, and this community gets bigger and bigger, with more and more people sharing their thoughts and knowledge. The mainstream history is becoming comedy hour at this point. So we can clearly see that these buildings all around the world may have had a second purpose, but they were without a doubt here to generate free energy, specifically for airships. And once you realize this, then we can go deeper and ask the question, was the previous civilization capable of using these buildings to power their flight that were so much more powerful, so much faster, and so much more incredible than an airship? I believe that they fully understood this technology. They were the ones that constructed it. They had this technology and were able to travel through the air so much faster than we can today, while using the Earth's natural energy. These buildings are technology. They are able to extract the energy and are able to turn it into a fuel. If you're looking for a why, a motive to suppress this technology, well, it would 100% benefit a civilization, us. It's free. There is zero benefit to free transportation, free energy. Do we need to go further for the why? So when you go around your town now and see the top of these buildings, we can all understand how popular this form of transportation really was. It was everywhere. Now, we have talked about Tartaria. We have shown in this episode in the beginning how there are possibly more countries and more land, such as Caucasia. So we have Tartaria, but we also have Barbaria, where you would get the term barbarians. And of course, again, have any of us heard of a place called Barbaria in history class? Maybe you have now. But in mainstream history, this is not something that is taught to us. We're not being told the truth about any of this. And we have many maps of a land called Barbaria. And I believe that these maps are from the previous civilization. They are not presented to us in the mainstream history. So it's our job to go find them in places that are not easily accessible. And in order to find something, you have to know what you're looking for. Thankfully, we do. And then we have this map from the early 1800s showing a land that was to the east of Portugal, that was named Barbaria, that is no longer there. It was south of France, west of Italy. So where did this land go? Also, this map shows that Barbaria had islands. And are these points on the map ley lines? What an incredible map to look at. Obviously, an event took place very recently, definitely proving that we've had land here that is no longer here. These maps are so detailed, yet these places are no longer here. And we have this group on the map who are most likely a depiction of the barbarians. Oh, and should I tie it back in with the airships? Can we just zoom in? Right above this disproportionate guy with the red and green on? What is above his head in the sky? That wouldn't be an airship, would it? You tell me. And if anyone can read that in whatever language it's written in, I'd love to know what it says in the comments below. Now, I emailed this company that I'm going to keep hidden, but with a little digging, we can all figure out who this is. But I emailed them, and they purchased the architecture firm Bradley & Bradley. Since they're an existing architecture firm, and it's not from thousands of years ago, they should have the construction photos of the National Guard Armory. But again, we are given another response that fits into what we're talking about here, that these are not the actual builders of these structures. If they built it, they would have at least one picture of construction somewhere in the world. But time and time again, as we have documented here so many times, they never have this on record. So they replied to me saying, we acquired Bradley & Bradley, architects and engineers, in 2016, and I have not come across any construction photos from the National Guard Armory in their files. So they go on to say to contact the Rockford Public Library to see if they have it. And then 2 sentences later, saying that I believe this information is currently being held at the Hart Interim Library during construction of the new downtown library. So I'm going to be contacting them, and I'll keep you all updated on the situation as we continue on with it. If you're interested in hearing what we find, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Very interesting stuff. Yet another place that has zero confirmed documentation on these construction projects all over the world. It's very strange, and this is why we are looking into it. Exposing something that was hidden for far too long. And for a bonus today, I have a lot of things that I want to share that I've found in my research, and I don't want to just brush over them, but I do want to share them with you all. I found this photo from Portland, Maine, of the old City Hall. In their newspaper from 1888, they wrote that it was built in 1825 and was used in 1832. So this was going on like 200 years ago, and you can see what they're all riding around on. They were able to build these kind of structures so fast, apparently, that after 63 years, this thing was so outdated and needed to be demolished. And it's interesting because this exact story is given to us all over the USA. And in all honesty, it's all over the world. It's weird how we were told that they lived in sheds, yet could afford to knock down relatively new structures like this. Oh, and we are told that they built this thing with a population of like 8,000 people. Like I said before, anyone on a horse, a donkey, and anyone who had a wagon, a shovel, or a chisel was born with incredible architecture skills in the 1800s. It's incredible stuff. And I know some of you have mentioned this topic in the comments below. Well, here is a conveniently half-destroyed photo from the 1904 World's Fair. And if we just zoom in a little, you can see what this exhibit was. And here's the description we are given. Served as a fair attraction and a working hospital. This is normal for a fair attraction? These fairs have a much darker purpose than what we have been told. Just read that last sentence. They were brought from hospitals to the concessions. Well, they were brought from somewhere, and this is such a weird thing. Using common sense, how many mothers would allow their kid that is born early to leave the hospital to be, in their own words, an attraction at a fair? Let's use our brains a little now. These are not coming from the hospital, in my opinion. If you want me to get more into this, I will. But I think we get the point, that this was an operation to populate these cities again. And when did Ellis Island start taking immigrants? New Year's Day, 1892? Perfect time to start an operation. You don't find it odd that right around the exact same time period as these World's Fairs, you have these operations to refill the USA back up with a brand new batch of
We are told that the first true power tool was invented in 1895, when a German company combined an electric motor with a manual drill. The drill weighed 16.5 pounds and required multiple operators. It wasn't until 1957 that a company called Bosch began designing power tools in bulk that were both economical and powerful. So then how did our historical ancestors, a more primitive, underdeveloped people, design and build some of the structures we encounter? What about all the gigantic monolithic stones we encounter that have been cut with such precision? Ask yourself, could you repeat this today with the arsenal of equipment we have at our disposal? And what about the magnificent ancient stepwells of the East? Stepwells, we are told, were multi-storied wells built by our primitive ancestors as ways to preserve the water supply during droughts. But look at the intricacy and complexity of these structures. Look at the glory and the finesse. Look at the geometric precision. All dug out and crafted from using hand tools. Yeah, right. What about the gigantic canal networks we find all over the world? The Erie Canal in America was allegedly built between 1817 and 1825. There were no civil engineers in America at this time. The people responsible for planning construction were novices, we are told. The canal is 12 meters wide and 4 meters deep. The Erie Canal spans 363 miles. But this was not just a case of digging each day for the Irish immigrants and their oxen companions. They had to fell hundreds of trees as they passed through the virgin forest. They had to build complicated aqueducts and locks, and they had to pass through the Niagara Escarpment, an 80-foot high wall of hard limestone. They had to use black powder to blast through this, we are told, as dynamite had yet to be invented. The canal spans 363 miles and was constructed over an 8-year period. This means that on average, 1 mile was completed every 8 days. What a record, especially since those responsible were novices, and power tools and dynamite were yet to be invented. I can tell you now, the so-called early settlers of the Americas did not build these canal systems. And what of the grand and magnificent castles scattered across our realm? Did you know that most were designed and constructed without plumbing systems and methods to heat rooms properly? The royal and the elites of the past were content without having the accessible necessities of survival, just as long as they could live within the grand and the glorious, while the peasants, in their modest abodes, enjoyed warmth throughout the long dark winters? I don't think so. And of course, there is the impossibility of the Great Giza Pyramid Complex. The pyramids, we are told, were constructed somewhere around 2500 BC. The Great Pyramid itself consists of 2.3 million blocks of limestone and granite, and its overall structure weighs 6 million tons. The largest granite stones weigh between 20 and 80 tons each. 20 tons is 20,000 kilograms. These blocks were carved from quarries with copper chisels and allegedly transported from 800 kilometers away. The so-called experts can only theorize that a vast amount of slave labor was required. Being gullible and falling for the official narrative of slave labor is one thing, but can someone please explain how the air shafts of the Great Pyramid align so neatly with the circumpolar stars? And then there is the curious case of star forts, or what the official liars of the world call bastion forts. Developed in the late 15th and early 16th century, these forts, we are told, were designed during an era of gunpowder and the cannon. The geometric design offered a nation's military protection against blind spots during conflict. Of course they did. We all know that the best protection during war is to design a fort with such precise geometric patterning. Has any real historian ever stopped to think just how perfect the geometry is here? Our primitive ancestors did not have the technology to view structures from above, but they still managed to achieve this? Give me strength. There is no way. We could not produce such perfect geometry on this scale today. We've been fooled once again. We have been indoctrinated with a false historical narrative and timeline. And, like the silly heliocentric model, all it takes is a closer look at this narrative and things soon start to fall apart, and the lies become so blatantly evident. Because of their satanic lies, piecing together an accurate, honest historical timeline has become an impossible Rubik's Cube. the official narrative a Pandora's box, only offering us tiny clues, half-truths, and deceptions. The stitchings of our true historical timeline have been loosened, the contents erased and muddled before we were even born into this world. And herein lies the problem. How to know where you are going if you don't know where you are in the first place? But you see, awakening is truly a gift. Once awake, we learn that we've always had the answers right in front of us. We've always had more than we know. But we had to regain our sight first before things started falling into place, before things started to make a little more sense. And here we are again, viewer, at the precipice of another great journey. What if I told you that before us there existed a civilization that was responsible for the most advanced technology ever developed, and that it was their understanding of the workings of our flat realm that was key to their innovation? And what if I told you that it is highly likely that our
Okay, so for this first part of the explanation, I'm just gonna dive right in. And some of you who may be new to the channel, specifically after watching Charlie's video, may not be used to this certain style, and may demand immediate evidence after hearing such far-out concepts. But if you're patient, after explaining the main premise of Tartaria and what we're even discussing, we can go into more detail and provide supporting arguments after the initial brief explanation. Tartaria is the biggest conspiracy, meaning it's not an officially approved narrative, yet in terms of the implications and magnitude of the topics covered and the cognitive dissonance associated with it is so great, it could be rightfully considered the largest conspiracy. Essentially, it all begins with all our taught history being, for the most part, a lie. So much so that it's mind-numbing to even fathom. Sure, there are likely some truths sprinkled in there. I'm not saying that everything that has happened has been faked, but more likely that it was set up to play out in a specific way. What Tartaria boils down to is fabricated histories and stolen cities. For example, what if I was to tell you that New York, Chicago, or any other major United States American city for that matter, was not built in the manner that they tell us, and was actually already here in America before the European settlers? Imagine that our cities are just recycled. That'd be too crazy, right? What proof is there to support such a claim? In order to demonstrate this, we would just have to dive into each city's history. And that's kind of the purpose of our City Unveiled videos. Literally a 5-hour documentary on a city, but for this instance, we can do Tampa. And shout out to Old World, Florida. There are the Ybor tunnels, where the mainstream story is that these are prohibition tunnels, and you'll see the same exact story in many other cities. One of the main proofs for Tartaria, and don't worry, we'll explain that word in a bit, but a good argument is these underground tunnels which can be found in almost every downtown American city. Some are small and may have been built in a more recent time, but others are massive and do not line up with the ability and available technology at the time. For example, the Washington Street Tunnel under the Chicago River. There are also legends in Pensacola of underground tunnels, yet they have been suppressed from the history books and have been left to oral history because they don't line up with the official PR-approved narrative. Look at this. The Henry B. Plant Museum, otherwise known as the Tampa Bay Hotel. Now to explain this to you, one of the aspects of Tartaria is stolen buildings and lost history. What you'll find is that every city has old world buildings. All you have to do is really question their history. Because if I were to tell you that I'm doubtful that they built this in the way that they tell us, meaning that this could be a repurposed building or an old world structure, most people would look it up and you would be directed to a museum that is in control of the history of that building and you'll be given a story. Most of the time, you'll get a few construction photos, But it's fascinating to find out how poorly documented the construction process was during this time in the early 19th century. It's the same thing. You'll see these buildings that are already mostly done with scaffolding, barely any people, windows in the ground, and clear signs of photo manipulation, which that's an entire subject of its own. Also in Tampa, there's the Ponce de Leon Hotel, which was completely poured concrete, which was supposedly the first of its kind. Also, these hotels in Florida were fully stocked with electricity during a time when Florida really didn't have that much going on, or so we're told. Also, you can see the familiar Russian-style architecture. Ever wonder why it's called St. Petersburg, Florida? Well, it's not just Florida. You can see this in New York, San Francisco, Charleston, St. Louis, and many more. Many times, old world churches downtown have questionable histories as being built or moved several times. You can see these old world buildings everywhere, from Gilded Age mansions and government buildings to small shops downtown. Even colleges, prisons, hospitals, military bases are all structures that do not line up with the official narrative that we are told. Of course, we're talking about structures from the 17th century to the 19th century in America. There's also no proof that they were built in the fashion that they tell us other than state-approved documents, manipulated photos, and just complete lies. There's also the common theme that throughout the downtowns of America, you can see what is often called mud-flooded windows. Of course, the typical answer is that these are just basements, but that doesn't really make that much sense. Some of these downtown areas get extreme flooding. Why would you build like this, especially with cities near the bay? Many of these basements actually have underground windows and doors that lead to nowhere. So this would imply that the streets actually used to be a lower level and then they were raised. We know this was done for a fact in Atlanta with the viaducts. They completely covered up old Atlanta. This is another interesting theme. Basically, many of these downtown cities in America have underground cities, which make no sense. What, did they just do a bunch of extra work for nothing? Put windows and doors and streets down there for the heck of it? It's more likely that there are lower levels of the cities in America that have been built over. And there is indeed evidence that there are massive tunnel systems underneath the majority of American cities. This alone should be enough to question the construction of these cities, as they didn't even have proper waste management until after the 1900s. They were literally defecating in chamber pots in the 1850s. What you have is that there's this complete contradiction with the culture, technology, and population counts needed to create these cities and buildings on this magnitude and scale in such a short time frame. They were building structures in the US in just a few years that were taking hundreds of years back in Europe. Let's keep in mind what we're discussing. Many of the downtowns in America have old world buildings that do not have an in-depth historical record. Some buildings have no construction photos at all. Yet, they feel very out of place for the time period that they're said to be built in. Again, if you want proof, that takes time, and we would have to list the buildings one by one as we've done in other videos. Because, again, in some cases we're talking about buildings from 200 years ago. It's not too hard to manipulate information over multiple generations. If we look at what was being taught in public schools just 50 years ago versus what's being taught now, there's really very little consistency. Why is it so crazy to question that the buildings that were being built all across America, even the ones from the early 1900s in some cases, and one of the things that Charlie demanded for was evidence. Evidence. Well, I agree. Where is the evidence that they built these old world buildings? Construction photos? You'd be surprised to know how many fake photos were used during war. Actually, all wars. Civil Wars, World War I and II both extensively use photo manipulations to reinforce the narratives being spread through newspapers and even radio. So I could just say I'm doubtful of those construction photos, in the same exact way that Moyse doubted the legitimacy of the 1540s map depicting castles in America. Yes, one is crayon, right? but it's quite clear that it's depicting castles in America in the 1540s and does not seem to be manipulated. Photos, yes, even construction photos, have been found to be complete fakes. There are other maps that show castles in America, including the early engravings of America depicting massive cities, but not only that, the 7 cities of Cibola from Joan Martinez's chart of 1578 is a map that depicts the 7 cities of Cibola, which were the mythical lands of gold that the Spanish believed to exist somewhere in the southwest of North America. Here is a depiction on the maps. Massive castle-like fortified cities. If you were to ask me, I trust these ancient manuscripts more than these low-quality construction photos given to us by some of these museums. Don't believe it? Is this photo of a Mormon construction site real? Most would automatically assume, since it's an old photo, that equals proof. But that's not true. It's a complete fabrication. Look at the vanilla skies. No faces? Floating ladder? They would paint on historic photos. We have an entire video exposing this history of photo manipulation. This would imply that they did not actually build these temples in such a short time span. The Mormons were said to have created multiple massive temple churches with no modern technology, and yet they're photo manipulating photos. Check them out, and thank you for everyone who shared their thoughts. We see them all, and it truly assists us in our research. There are also many comments concerned with the legitimacy of these photos. How do we know that these postcards are even real? Yet, as referenced in the first video, there is a book on this subject, Babylon Surreal Babies, and on top of that, we will see further proof in this video that this indeed was what they were advertising in the early 1890s. There was someone on the Discord claiming that we actually came in and photoshopped these postcards, which couldn't be further from the truth. Then we saw a comment that posted a link and a title, and it caught my interest. Come to find out that this rabbit hole gets even deeper. Yes, even deeper than the fact that they were literally shipping and delivering babies legally in 1913, and they would even put stamps on the children's clothing. Even crazier than that, supposedly, the world's first narrative film, the first real movie ever, is called La Photoshoot, or The Cabbage Patch Fairy, from 1896. Now that was the 1900s version. There's some controversy on the film outside of the entire Cabbage Patch repopulation subject because the director was a woman named Alice Guy and later was named Alice Guy Blanchet, which creepily is the same exact woman from the Postcards. The 1896 film La Photoshoot, The Fairy of the Cabbages, is a lost film directed by Alice Guy, and so supposedly they recreated this film multiple times. You will see this happen with many lost films, and that's its own subject that there may be something else going on with all these early films and we're not really told about it. Quote, many films of the silent era have been lost. The Library of Congress estimates 75% of all silent films are lost forever. About 10,000 American silent films were produced, but only 2,700 of them still exist in some complete form.
Have you ever heard of Alice Guy Blanchet?
I'm a filmmaker. I've never even heard of that.
I've never heard of Alice. I'd heard of her no, I'd never heard of her.
I think people will think you're making it up.
(1895). The Lumières present the first public demonstration of their new invention, the cinématographe, the first reliable method to project motion pictures. Among those invited, a young secretary. She thought, why not use film to tell stories? Alice Guy writes, directs, and produces one of the first narrative films ever made. Alice is one of the first to utilize many film techniques, including close-ups, hand-tinted color, and synchronized sound. Alice founds her own company, where she directs and manages all aspects of production. Following a 2-decade career comprised of 1,000 films that she wrote, directed, or produced, Alice disappears from filmmaking. How could such an important figure in the birth of cinema not be known?
Many original footages that were completely lost, and then they came in and just replaced the missing footage? Very strange. But the 1896 version of the Cabbage Patch Fairy had a completely different story, involving a honeymoon couple, a farmer, pictures of babies glued to cardboard, and a live baby. We will cover this in detail later, but we only know of this because that's what the supposed Alice Guy character left us with. But how do we know? I mean, did you see the way she was treating those babies? The big question is, why is this the first idea for a movie? It's all very strange. And on top of that, this 1896 version is a lost film, so we don't even have the original. There are most likely many more. But arguably, this is the first movie ever made. Then she remakes this film twice with the 1900 and 1902 versions. Now, the reason that we know there was an earlier lost film is because in 1922, the director Etienne Arnaud wrote in his memoirs that Alice Guy, quote, was the first to have the idea of staging a dramatic scene in front of the cinematographic lens, end quote. The controversy started here because he supposedly, according to the mainstream narrative, wrote the wrong film. The film he was talking about, directed by Alice Guy, was not the Cabbage Patch Fairy, but another film, Les Méfaits Domptés de Vous, or The Misadventures of the Veal Head? So calf head? Baby cows? What's with all this dark humor early film stuff? I mean, all of it is very eerie. These are the first films being made? This film is about a baby cow's head that escapes from a butcher's plate, and then somehow the head combines with the butcher to produce a hybrid human? Which, if you look it up, it will say it was directed by another director called Ferdinand Zecca. Now this gets deeper because these first movies were created by the oldest French film company in the world, the Gaumont or Gaumont Film Company, or the Society of Establishments. So the first films were done by production companies, but strangely many of their first films involve very macabre themes, and it makes you question if any of this has to do with Alice Guy and the Cabbage Patch Kids. Well, I would say so, because why would the first films be promoting the selling of babies? Well, they created this first Cabbage Patch Fairy movie in 1896 specifically for the Paris World Fair and the baby incubators. This movie is proof that the baby postcards are real. As we were looking into Alice Guy, we found a very fascinating page on this exact subject. And at first, it just came from clicking on a Google image and we were looking for older screenshots of the film. Come to find out that this page from 3 years ago was putting this all together as well. They're not necessarily promoting the Orphan Trains stuff or anything, but this is a massive library of these old postcards, and she connects it with Alice Guy. Then she translated them as well, so shout out to this page. But before we continue, I just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page that these are real postcards and what they are. two really stuck out to me in this collection because they made it clear that these postcards had to do with repopulation without any question. In this depiction, we can see that there are cabbage and rose seeds being mixed into a device that then produces babies in mass while the woman in the red dress catches the baby, then they fall out of her dress, and then on top of that, she's holding the clock weight signifying changing time. There's another illustration that translates to repopulation tank or center, and we see a giant woman, the one in the dress, being the symbol for the Cabbage Patch Kids, generating many kids that go flying in the air as the man with the top hat begins pumping to fuel the operation. Then you can even see that they're maids to take care of them, and new people coming in to take home babies. Now many seem to think that somehow these could be photoshopped or fake in the sense that they were done in the modern day. Well, take a look at even more of these that were not in the first video.
Information we have to speculate. So let's meet in the middle at 12 months to find a construction guy. And then he knocks this thing out somehow by April of 1896. Who believes that he did this in less than a year? How many people worked for him? It's just weird that they tell us that he was just an owner of a quarry that had limestone in it. Now all of a sudden, he is a construction superintendent guy that builds massive courthouses in a year. Wow, the 1800s were incredible. You could truly be anything you want back then. Amazing. And a total joke of a story. This is absolute insanity that this kind of stuff is what we are supposed to believe actually happened. We all understand that in order to build a massive courthouse, you would need to get all the materials there. We would need to have a proper amount of construction workers that are properly trained. This quarry owner can't just go build it himself. We would need the proper equipment. Incredible architecture. The planning had to be perfect. Using the specs that they give us on this courthouse, I asked ChatGPT a question, and the answer was eye-opening. I asked hypothetically, how long would it take to build a courthouse in 1895? And how many men would you need? I asked if it could give me a breakdown of how much material would be needed, and also include other details that are important in constructing a courthouse that covers 2.7 acres. I explained that it is a building in a Romanesque revival style with eclectic details, meaning it covers other types of architecture designs, and that it will be built with red brick and white limestone trim. Now these are the specs that we are given from the mainstream narrative. This is what they tell us. They tell us this information because they have to. The thing is literally sitting here looking right at us. For anyone that wants to go look at it, you can walk right up to it and see it, or you can see a picture of it as we are right now. So let's see what this AI tells us. We are told that constructing a courthouse in 1895 in the specs that they stated would have been a significant undertaking. And here is the breakdown. Just the design and planning would have taken pretty much a year. Just because it's 1895, you still need permits and approvals. This happened in 1895. This isn't cavemen days, where you just get to build massive buildings and not tell anyone about it. So the fact that they're ignoring this part of the story over and over is crazy. This would have taken another couple months. So then we move on to the materials. We are told that the amount of red brick needed would depend on the design and size of the courthouse. Courthouses that cover 2.7 acres could use hundreds of thousands to millions of bricks. This is an unbelievable amount of material just for bricks alone. The process in getting these materials to the site is not easy. So then the white limestone trim. 100,000 cubic feet of limestone. The wood for interior elements, including flooring, stairs, and doors. A substantial amount of wood would be required. Then we will need steel and glass, and not just any glass. They have to be perfect for windows, in the Romanesque revival style. Now, of course, the best part, in my opinion, because they don't even mention any people that helped this quarry owner guy. The labor, the number of workers needed would vary. But constructing such a massive courthouse might require hundreds of laborers. Hundreds? And not a mention of one in this story? And this isn't even to build it in a year. This is just saying to build it in a respectable timeline. So to build it in a year, there had to be way more than hundreds of workers like we're told. Amazing. Okay, you would need bricklayers, carpenters, masons. Oh, did I say that? Steelworkers, and general laborers. When we are told that slaves and prisoners built these places in a year, just remember this and ask yourself if you think this is true or not. Now we have the construction time. Given the scale and complexity, construction could take several years, perhaps 3 to 5 years. The Romanesque revival style, with its ornate details, would require careful craftsmanship, which takes time. So these workers had to have been trained and been good at it, especially finishing it in a year. This is insane. How were these workers not world-renowned? Wouldn't there be statues of them? They probably could have made the statues themselves in their backyards in a couple of days, since they were so good at it. And now, of course, we have the ridiculous part of the transportation. Transporting materials to the construction site. And before we get into this, I want to mention this, that they don't mention this in the story. And I think they don't on purpose, because it is so insane. Here we go. Transporting materials to the construction site would require horses, wagons, and likely a nearby source of limestone. Okay, so the horses and wagons moved the 100,000 cubic feet of limestone from the quarry. What a joke. Now they will need tools, of course. You can't do this without tools. So here's the tools and equipment section. Tools of the time would include hammers, chisels, saws, cranes, and various other hand tools. Just hammering and chiseling away in 1895 to 1896 with their horses and wagons. The fact that they tell us these buildings go up all over the world in a year is such a lie, in my opinion. You'd need a source of water for mixing mortar, and for the workers. If it's a large project, which this one definitely is, you might even need on-site housing for the workers, which they don't have on-site housing for the workers. Have you ever seen a narrative say this? No. They ignore the actual logistics in every narrative. You need people to build these places, and people need things, such as housing, food, water. This is common sense, yet never mentioned. Stone carvers and artisans would be required for this work. What was their names? Did the quarry owner do that himself? No. Which company had pro stone carvers and artisans? And of course, supervision. You'd need a skilled supervisor and project managers to ensure the work proceeds smoothly and to quality standards. And this is literally the only part that we are given. The only part we are given is the person that should be watching over all of the things that actually have to happen. I'm going to put this in sports terms. They're basically telling us the name of the coach for the Patriots, and then forgetting to tell us all about Tom Brady, or the coach's name of the Lakers and the Bulls, and not saying anything about Kobe, LeBron, Michael Jordan, or Dennis Rodman. All we get is Phil Jackson and Frank Vogel. This is insane. This is not working anymore. So I asked it to be more specific with the timeline. I said, so in all, how long would this all take? It responded with this. Given the complexity and scale of constructing a courthouse, covering 2.7 acres in the Romanesque revival style, with red brick and white limestone trim, in 1895, the entire process could take 1 year to just design and plan it. Another several months to permitting and approvals, several more months to a year for the materials, and 3 to 5 years to build the building. So in total, it mathematically and logistically should take anywhere from 4.5 years to 7.5 years. This is unbelievable, considering so many times we are told that a building goes down in a fire and then another one is built in a few months. This kind of brushing it off with a few months kind of thing isn't working anymore. And I don't want to end the episode yet. I want to go even deeper and even more specific. So I asked, how many horses would they need for this project? And here we go. The horses would be needed for 6 major things in this project in 1895. Transporting, milling and lifting, general labor, site grading and excavation, water and power, cranes and heavy lifting, and getting the cranes there to the site, of course. This would take 20 to 30 horses to finish the project in 4.5 to 7.5 years, not 1 year. So we all understand. They would need way more than 30 horses, and we all understand that horses need water. Remember, this is for 30 horses for possibly 7.5 years. I want to make that point extremely clear. This is not the 1 year timeline that we're told. Now here we go. Let's absolutely destroy the narrative and end it forever. that any building anywhere in the world, like this one, could not be simply built in a year and just brushed off with zero explanation. How much water would the horses actually need? This is a key point that cannot be ignored, like it is in the mainstream narrative. A typical horse would drink anywhere from 5 to 15 gallons of water per day for a project like this. This is to properly keep the horses hydrated, or they will die, especially in Texas, where it's extremely hot in the summer months. For only 30 horses, you would need 300 gallons of water per day. This is only 10 horses over 7.5 years. Where is all this water coming from? Why is this massive point ignored? The point alone proves that this project did not happen in a year. This is such a horrible slip up for the narrative. And it is the most important part of the logistic project that needs to be taken care of. Without the water supply for the main transportation for the project, none of this happens anywhere in the world in the 1800s. From this point on, a narrative that tells us that they built a building in a year in the 1800s without explaining the massive supply of water for the horses should be looked at as a lie. Incredible. This is a major failure by the narrator, a massive flaw that now opens the floodgates.
Personal communication. Because here's what most people today don't know. And I don't know why, it's not really a secret or anything, but most people just don't know this. And that's the fact that the Kaiser of Germany, Wilhelm II, and the Tsar of Russia, Nicholas II, are cousins. Third cousins, I believe, to be more accurate. And get this, they both just happen to be first cousins with King George, who was King of England at the time, going into World War I. So imagine that. These are what I call the three cousins that started World War I. And by coincidence, I happen to have three cousins as well. And I certainly couldn't picture them having a dispute or an argument that would lead to the deaths of tens of millions of people. But I guess that's the difference between being an emperor, or a czar, or a kaiser, or a king, or whatever you want to call it, and being someone like me, an everyday ordinary Joe. But anyways, here's something else that most people today don't know. And that's that in 1914, when World War I started, the children and grandchildren of Queen Victoria of England and Christian IX, King of Denmark, sat on the thrones of all these countries across Europe, making World War I very much a family affair. And these family relations would earn Queen Victoria the nickname of Grandmother of Europe, and King Christian IX the Stepfather of Europe. And as noted, entering World War I, George V was already the King of England, as he had taken over the throne in 1910 with the death of his father, King Edward VII, who was the son of Queen Victoria, making George V the grandson of Queen Victoria. And following the line on down, King George V is the grandfather of today's Queen Elizabeth II. So how about that? Queen Elizabeth's grandfather was first cousins to Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany and Tsar Nicholas of Russia. And it gets even odder when you consider that Queen Elizabeth's husband, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, is a great-grandson of King Christian IX of Denmark, because Queen Elizabeth is a great-great-granddaughter of King Christian IX of Denmark as well. Here's a small part of the family tree to get a better understanding of how the rulers of Germany, England, and Russia were all cousins. And if you'll notice, Queen Victoria is also the grandmother of Kaiser Wilhelm II. Here's a family photo of a bunch of the European royals during happier times, though you wouldn't know it by the looks on their mugs. In front and center we see Queen Victoria, with Wilhelm seated beside her, and Nicholas standing beside him. Here's a shot of Nicholas and Wilhelm. And here's a shot of King George and Wilhelm. And here's another shot of them. But it's the pictures of King George and Tsar Nicholas that get me, because while they are first cousins, they look more like they're almost twin brothers. It's in the eyes where you can tell the difference. But look at these two. They look so much alike it's unreal. And in today's political climate, it's just hard to imagine that the monarchs of England and Russia were first cousins who looked like brothers. So, by July 30th, 1914, we see in the headlines, European monarchs on the verge of Great War, which is what World War I used to be known as until World War II came along. On August 3rd, 1914, we see in the headlines, Germany invades Belgium. The Kaiser formally declares war against the French. England forced to fight. And US President Wilson says keep cool. And then a couple of days later, on August 5th, 1914, a mere 5 weeks after the Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife were assassinated, we see in the headlines, Great Britain declares war on Germany. And what happened was Britain gave Germany some ultimatums, with a deadline of midnight, August 4th, 1914, to which Germany ignored, thereby putting the declaration of war into effect. And then we see by August 9th, 1914, 6 weeks after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife, all these countries would be involved in the growing war. And it was 5 days earlier, on August 4th, 1914, that US President Woodrow Wilson would proclaim US neutrality in the war, and the United States wouldn't enter the war for another 3 years. And while the kings of Europe were killing their way across the battlefields those first 3 years, the kings of Wall Street, as we're going to see coming up, were busy making a killing of their own.